Hello everyone, welcome back.
Chapter 18, Class Rep. As both Itza and Izuku entered Class 1A, Izuku was immediately ambushed by half the class. Midoriya, you're back. Midoriya, you looked amazing during that match. How are you even alive right now? It was almost like the reporters outside, but now they were all asking questions about him. Luckily, Itza stepped in before he got too overwhelmed. Everyone back up. Midoriya is still recovering from the battle, so you all need to give him some space, he said, chopping the air. The rest of the students took a quick step back as they managed to look embarrassed at their eagerness. From there, they decided to approach one at a time. Hey, there. I'm Kirishima Ajiro. I think it's awesome you managed to hold your own against Bakugo. He's super strong. The redhead that has usually been following Bakugo around said. We've been looking over the training results since yesterday. Oh, I'm Siro Hanta. The student with tape dispensers on his elbows said. Izuku waved at the group and tried to smile. Hi. You all seem to know me, so. Of course we know you. You're Midoriya Deku. The pink-skinned girl said. Immediately Izuku felt cold seep deep into his bones. Even worse than when he first was revived and still getting used to his new temperature. Oh, my name isn't Deku, it's Izuku. This surprised the crowd he had amassed, quickly taking the wind out of their sails. It was Kirishima that broke the silence, pulling a sheet of paper from his bag. It seemed to be the class roster as he looked it over. Izuku, huh? But I heard Bakugo calling you Deku all week. And here the kanji can be read as dash. It's not my name, Izuku said firmly as he took a step around the group to go to his desk where Itza had set his bag down. Deku is a name Bakugo gave me when we were little kids and I hadn't gotten my quirk yet. So Deku means. Silence fell over the class as everyone processed that piece of information. Izuku felt his face heat up as he tried to keep the embarrassment at bay. Great, he walked into them praising his abilities, and now they knew just how useless he used to be. Yeah. So my name isn't Deku. It's Midoriya Izuku. His voice was cold but resigned. He knew it wasn't their fault for the mistake. Well, it's nice to meet you, Midoriya, Siro said, breaking the awkward silence. His smile seemed a little more forced than previously, but the tension in the room melted away soon after. From there, they all took a moment to introduce themselves to Midoriya, who had apparently missed the intros during battle training. Poking his head up, Izuku smiled at each person that walked up to him. Some even asked about his injury. Not to pry but to genuinely ask him how he was healing. Aoyama even offered to be the one to carry his bag for him for the rest of the day, but Izuku quickly declined. Really, I'll be fine after I see Recovery Girl after lunch. One by one, students filed in and sat at their desks until the only person not there was Bakugo. Occasionally, people would glance over at his chair, subconsciously also looking at Izuku before turning back to their conversations. Pretty soon, Izawa came shuffling in a few minutes later than usual. Probably due to the reporters outside. Even so, everyone quickly became quiet, not wanting a repeat of their first day where they were criticized for not quieting down quick enough. Decent work on yesterday's combat training. We have a lot to go over before the end of class, so listen up, he announced in his usual monotone voice. I saw the video feed and read over your results. And I'm sure by now you've all noticed the absence of one of your classmates. Bakugo Katsuki has been suspended following his actions during his combat training match. If I had it my way, he'd be expelled already. Take that as a lesson to always obey your instructions given to you by a teacher. Am I understood? His voice was cold, sending a wave of warning over the entire class. It was clear that would be their one and only warning. A chorus of yes, Mr. Izawa, broke out among the students as he looked over his notes. Anyway, on to feedback. Midoriya, you're up first. Sometimes your opponent is stronger than you, so instead of fighting, your best bet is to retreat and wait for backup. But he wasn't just picking on Izuku. In fact, he had well thought out critiques for everyone, and the entire class soaked up the new knowledge like sponges. Now that that's out of the way, let's get down to business, he said after everyone had their moment. Your first task will decide your future at UA. As a class, you need a class representative. Being the class rep comes with a lot of extra responsibilities, but it's also a way to get noticed by hero agencies. Decide amongst yourselves. You have until my nap is over. At once Aizawa slumped down into a sleeping bag hidden behind the podium. As soon as he finished speaking, everyone started shouting out their desire to be the class rep. Yikes. It was never this bad when I was in school. Lucky you, then. The commotion was soon interrupted as Aiza stood in front of the class with his hand motion that Izuku's begun to understand as punctuation of sorts when the taller boy was serious. Everyone settle down. There's an obvious way to handle this situation. We can settle this with a vote. Are you saying that because you want us to vote for you? Kaminari asked bluntly, causing Aiza to turn red. Well, not exactly. I would like the position, yes, but holding a vote is still the fairest way to decide. The majority of everyone may vote for themselves, but the person who does get multiple votes surely has what it takes to lead this class. Izuku had to admit, his reasoning made sense. And it seemed the rest of the class agreed as they took out paper to write their votes on. Aiza, as the most trustworthy one in the class, was selected to collect all the slips and tally the votes. As Izuku brought out his slip, he thought about his vote. He certainly wasn't going to vote for himself. He'd be a terrible leader. Well, I don't know about that. I think you'd be great. Thanks. But I'd rather not have that kind of attention on me. Nana sighed but didn't argue with him as she let him cast his vote. Instead of voting for himself, Izuku penciled in Aiza's name and folded it. Aiza clearly wanted the position, and Izuku couldn't think of anyone more capable than him. He was responsible, trustworthy, and while he tended to be a stick in the mud, he could be dependable. Exactly what they needed for a class rep. The whole class waited with bated breath as Aiza took time to count each individual vote and write the final total on the board from least votes to the most. Izuku had expected to be dead last, seeing as how he didn't even vote for himself, but that clearly wasn't the case. In fact, there were a fair bit of students who seemed to have voted for someone else. Still, Izuku watched Aiza write down all the people with singular votes, people who voted for themselves it seemed. Except for Aiza, who only had one vote as well. Which meant he didn't vote for himself. Then there was Yaoyorozu, who had 2 votes. Izuku wished he had seen her battle. She must have been amazing. However, what surprised him the most was the fact that he was written at the top. And it seems our new class rep is Midoriya, who received 6 votes. Aiza announced. Whoa, 6. Mineta exclaimed. Who was it? Who voted for him? It was Yurika who replied to him. Hey. The point of a vote was to keep it anonymous. But, I did vote for him, she said with red cheeks. I did as well, Aiza announced. And me. He's seriously manly. Kirishima said with a smile. Kuro, me too. Azui croaked. There was silence as people waited for the other people to speak up. But there was nobody else. Even so, Izuku froze in his seat. He couldn't be the class rep. He didn't know the first thing about it. Right. Aizawa sighed as he poked his head up from behind the podium. Class rep is Midoriya. Our deputy is Yaoyorozu. Congrats, you two. See? Other people think you're a good leader too. Nana praised as she pet his hair. So make them proud, okay? Yaoyorozu and Midoriya were asked to stand in front of the class, but Izuku couldn't stop his knees from shaking. How did this happen? he heard Yayorozu mutter under her breath as she spotted his nerves. Yeah, that's what he would like to know. Aitsa should have won. Or Yayorozu even. Not him. He didn't even vote for himself. Don't listen to her, Izuku. She doesn't know you. She's probably upset that she didn't win. Izuku watched Yayorozu shiver as if cold and take a step away from him. At once, Nana settled into her spot, wrapping Izuku in warmth. Now take your seats. We'll decide on the other positions after lunch. For now, it's time to go to your next class. And they were dismissed. Izuku was quickly surrounded by his friends congratulating him as Aitsa carried his bag once more. He couldn't help but smile at their support. But that didn't stop him from feeling like he wasn't worthy of the position. I wish you had been voted as president, Izuku told Aitsa honestly as they walked down the hall. You're good with rules and order. I'm just, he trailed off with a shrug. He meant to be nonchalant, but the feeling of inadequacy hung around like the sting of his shoulder. The group made up of Aitsa, Uraraka, Azui, and Izuku stopped suddenly in the middle of the hall. Three heads turned to face the green head boy who was standing almost behind them rather hunched in on himself. Midoriya, I have to disagree. I think you're the most qualified one out of all of us. Aitsa said seriously. Yeah. That's why I voted for you. Uraraka backed him up. I mean, no offense to Aitsa, but you saved me during the entrance exams. You're already a hero in my book. Not to mention you're a likable person, Kuro. Unlike Bakugo. Azui joined in. Aitsa nodded as his argument was supported. Exactly. As Azui dash. Tsu dash. As Tsu said, Aitsa corrected without a second thought. You're more likable than me. I know I can be overbearing when it comes to rules. And you saw me during the entrance exams. I assumed your character based on a few interactions. Izuku was quick to defend him, but Aitsa kept talking as if he hadn't spoken. My point being, Midoriya, all three of us, and three more of our classmates, believe you have what it takes to represent us. Now, if you simply do not want the position, we can have another vote after lunch. But we all think you're more than qualified. Izuku was stunned. His actions in the entrance exam had been reflex. After all, how could he sit by and let Uraraka get hurt? That's what a hero does, sweetie. Do you think a civilian would be so quick to help those in need? Nana's voice was soft and soothing, helping Izuku's hands settle from their shaking. I'll think about it, Izuku said finally. But we should go. Before we're late to class. The trio ahead of him nodded but waited for him to start walking before they followed. They ended up being the last ones to class, but Izuku appeared confident with his friends backing him. Maybe, just maybe he could accept the position. Izuku had been thinking about what his friends had said for a while. Even to the point where he barely paid any attention in class. Of course, he could always just ask for Aitsa's notes, but that wasn't the point. He even texted and consulted Shinsu on what he thought about it, but Shinsu told him the same thing as everyone else. So many people believed in him to be a good class rep. Why couldn't he believe in himself? Izuku's thoughts were interrupted by a tray smacking the table beside him. Move over. Looking up, Izuku was surprised to see Shinsu standing beside him. Without thinking, Izuku moved over from his seat, giving Shinsu room to drag a chair over and sit down. Excuse me, I understand the lunchroom is crowded, but that's not an excuse to disrespect. Aitsa began to reprimand, but Izuku shook his head quickly. No, Aitsa, it's fine. This is Shinsu Hitachi. We met over the summer. He's in class 1B. Izuku explained. Shinsu nodded to the other three as he picked up his rice. I usually eat elsewhere, but Izuku's overthinking the whole class rep thing, so I figured I'd come to talk some sense into him. Elsewhere, Izuku knew to be one of his parents' classrooms. Shinsu didn't like large crowds, so if he was willing to break his routine to talk to Izuku, then Izuku knew he had messed up. I'm sorry dash. No, just listen for a minute, Shinsu said, looking very much like Aizawa as he stared Izuku down over his rice. I've already said that I think you'd make a great class rep. But you need to stop overthinking the job. Yes, it's an important position, but it's not a dictatorship. You have a deputy, right? He paused, waiting for Izuku to nod. Then they can help you stay focused and keep you in line if you overstep. Which you won't, obviously. Because you're Izuku. Yurarika couldn't help but laugh as she listened to Shinsu thoroughly reprimand Izuku. Izuku's cheeks reddened as he looked down at his food. Okay, I guess you're right. I know I'm right. Now eat before I tell Nana. Shinsu said, finally shoving food into his mouth. Listen to him, sweetie. He knows what he's talking about. Izuku's nerves seemed to leave him all at once as he laughed. Fine, fine. You win. As he started eating his food, Izuku looked up to see both Aitsa and Yurarika staring. What? Izuku asked self-consciously. Is there something on my face? Luckily, Aitsa seemed to snap out of it as he spoke. Not at all, I guess it's just a little strange seeing you so familiar with someone outside of our own class. Yeah, we all come from different middle schools, so unless multiple students from the same school make it into UA, we don't really have any of our old friends. Yurarika elaborated. Oh, Izuku said as he set his chopsticks down. Then I should introduce you all. Shinsu, these are my friends, Aitsa Tinya, Yurarika Okako, and Tsuyu Ajui. Everyone, this is my friend Shinsu Hitachi. Shinsu nodded to each person in greeting and smiled slightly as they nodded in turn. It's nice to meet some of Izuku's friends. Hopefully, you can keep him in line while I'm not there. Izuku went to defend himself but was interrupted as a bell started ringing loudly. Warning, Level 3 security breach. Students, please evacuate the building in an orderly fashion. At once, chaos broke out as the older students explained that the warning was for someone who managed to get past the school's barrier. Students were running to the exits, flipping their chairs over in their haste. Nana. Who's here? What's going on? Izuku asked as he was flushed into the hall by the mob of students. He winced as his shoulder was jarred around by the squirming students. I don't know. But I'm going to find out. Izuku felt her warmth leaving his side, several students in the hall shivering harshly as Nana made her way through. As soon as she left, he was shoved harshly into the window by the mob. He could barely hear anything over the screaming of the students. Izuku! Shinsu shouted, making his way over to the boy with Yurarika holding onto his sleeve. Are you all right? He shrugged, wincing as his shoulder twinged again. But there was no time to explain as Shinsu looked over his shoulder out the window. Izuku, now curious, turned his head and looked out as well. There was a mob outside as well, it seemed. But instead of frantic students, it was reporters. They had somehow made it into the gate and were pressuring what looked to be Aizawa and present Mike for comments. Looking back over to Shinsu, the duo let out a sigh of relief. There as no intruder then, threat seemingly diminished, Izuku's mind turned to how to get the students to calm down. Izuku could try to float over them, but he was still injured, and with Nana off investigating, he had no power source. But there was Yurarika. Yurarika, make me float as high as you can. Izuku said, reaching between bodies for her hand. It was a struggle, but he felt her fingers brush his palm and suddenly he was floating above the frantic bodies. Using the window, he pushed himself forward until he was able to grab onto the exit sign hanging above the door. Just in time, as well, as he felt Yurarika's quirk leaving his body. Everyone listen. Izuku shouted as loud as he possibly could. There is no intruder. Look outside. It's just the media. Thinking about what Aiza would say, Izuku continued despite his throat's protests. We're UA students, aren't we? We should be able to handle something like this without causing a panic. There was silence as everyone seemed to relax. Murmurs rang out as students began slowly making their way outside in an orderly fashion. With a sigh, Izuku floated himself down to the floor, feeling large hands helping him to his feet. Looking up, Izuku saw Aiza's smiling face with Shinsu, Uraraka, and Azui standing behind him. You did great, class rep. Uraraka cheered. Izuku was just about to reply when he felt cold seep into his veins like needles. Izuku. Nana. Chapter 19, Bonds. Izuku was nearly swept off his feet at the force of heat that swelled within him so suddenly. We have to go. Now, we have to go now. Nana insisted, seemingly trying to push Izuku along, but not being able to make contact. We need to find Aizawa now. He's outside dealing with the reporters, Nana. Then find Nezu. There's no time. Go. Izuku took off running down the hall as fast as he could, feeling as if there was something chasing him. His friends were left behind him as he sapped power from the hall lights to fuel his sprinting. It was only when he saw the plaque on the door labeled principal that he finally stopped. Go in. Izuku, hurry. Despite his lack of air, Izuku barged into the office seeing Nezu at his computer. His entrance seemed to startle him as Nezu jumped out of his seat. Young Midoriya, are you all right? He asked worriedly. Come. Sit. Izuku did just that as he tried to catch his breath. Nana, she dash. Someone other than the reporters got inside. They were looking at lesson plans for All Might. Izuku quickly relayed the information, feeling dread sink into his stomach. Nezu was quick to jump back into his seat, quickly tapping away at his computer. Most likely to alert the staff. Did she recognize the intruder? He asked, his normal friendly tone gone. Nana was silent and Izuku felt his anxiety rise. Nana. Did you? Izuku asked again. Yes. But Izuku, he can't know. This is a matter of one for all. I'll explain later. But tell him they need to find out what was on those plans. Nezu wasn't too happy about the information being withheld, but he nodded anyway. I'll have the staff on it right away. Don't worry, young Midoriya, we'll get a handle on this immediately. I need to use the computer. Nana said urgently. The request was odd, but Nezu allowed it. Pushing his own chair back and leaving room for Izuku to step up to the keyboard. Open up a Word file. As Izuku did so, Nana guided him through typing out a quick sentence and sending it off to print. As Izuku went to close out the program, the computer started to spark and smoke before the monitor finally went dark. Nana. What the dash? I'm sorry, but I had to. Come on, Izuku. Grab the paper. Let's go. It seemed the urgency was still there. Izuku apologized profusely to Nezu as he ran over to the printer and headed for the door. There was no time to hear the principal's response as Izuku took off down the hall once more. Finally, he seemed to come to an office marked for All Might. However, the door was locked. Break it. The lights flickered as Nana funneled power into Izuku. But before he could reach the doorknob, he felt a warm trickle down his face. Wiping it away, he saw blood dripping from his nose. Quickly he bent the door handle with ease before pushing the now broken door open. The power left him in a rush, making him feel a little lightheaded. With his sleeve, he wiped his blood off the doorknob. Luckily, there was nobody inside, but Izuku was still on edge. Drop the note and let's go outside before Aizawa starts trying to look for us. Izuku could do nothing but comply, dropping the note, face up, onto the large desk. Find out what happened to Kotaro Shimura. That done, Izuku started sprinting again only to find that the students were now returning to the building. As this happened, the chilling pain Izuku felt started to dissipate. "Are we safe now?" Nana was quick to wrap him in her warmth. "Yes, we are. Izuku, you did so well for me. I'm so sorry I pushed you so hard. Are you alright?" Before Izuku could answer, there was a shriek coming from the hall. "Oh my goodness, Midoriya, are you alright?" Eureka shouted as she ran over. "Your nose is bleeding." Looking over, Izuku saw his friends rushing over, Shinsu specifically leading them. The look on his friend's face made Izuku feel like utter garbage. "I'm okay, Shinsu. I swear," he said instantly as he held his hand up to his nose. "It's just bleeding a little." Shinsu seemed to relax at the fact that Izuku was alright and even bleeding a little. But that didn't stop him from grabbing onto Izuku and heading down the hall. "We're going to Recovery Girl. Right now. All of you tell Eraserhead where we're going," Shinsu called back. Izuku was a little exhausted from all the running around but followed along without complaint. When the pair reached around the corner and away from prying eyes, Shinsu looked to Izuku for an explanation. There was an intruder. Nana saw them. "I had to go tell Nezu as soon as I heard," he explained loosely. "And the nosebleed?" Nana was afraid. "She was draining power to get me to run faster and it went a little overboard. But like I said, it's just a nosebleed. I didn't dash." Shinsu nodded and turned away quickly before Izuku could finish his sentence. They arrived at Recovery Girl's office soon enough and the kind old lady tisked upon seeing Izuku. "You just can't seem to stay out of trouble, can you?" she huffed as she motioned for him to sit on a bed. "Take your shirt off as well. Might as well kill two birds with one stone." Izuku hadn't thought about his shoulder wound before then. Unconsciously, his eyes darted to Shinsu. "I already know. My dad told me as soon as he came home last night." Shinsu didn't seem happy at all and Izuku felt bad being the cause of that. With his bare chest exposed, Recovery Girl took care of peeling off the bandage from his shoulder. It had started bleeding a little as well, which Izuku assumed to be from when he was knocked into the window. It was dark and scar tissue had already begun to form around the edges. And as Recovery Girl pressed a kiss to the back of his hand, Izuku felt her quirk start to work. He leaned back against the edge of the bed, feeling a little lightheaded for a moment before it subsided. "There. It's not perfect, but that's the best I can do. There's too much scar tissue already," she said. "And your nose will be just fine, dearie. Would you like a throat lozenge?" Izuku nodded and thanked Recovery Girl as she handed him a small red candy drop that tasted like eucalyptus when he popped it into his mouth. "You'll walk him back to class, won't you?" Recovery Girl asked Shinsu. "He should be alright as long as he doesn't overexert himself again." Shinsu nodded as he looked at Izuku. "Come on. Izuwa is probably worried about us." Izuku didn't like the cold tone in Shinsu's voice but followed along anyway. The duo walked out of the office and started their trek to Class 1A. "Are you mad at me?" Shinsu sighed heavily but was silent for a minute more. "No. I'm just frustrated. You always seem to get hurt when I'm not around and I can't help you." "Well, is there any way you could transfer to Class 1A? Your dad is Eraserhead, right? Can't he pull some strings?" Izuku asked hopefully for something to help his friend's frustrations but deflated when Shinsu shook his head. "That's precisely why I can't just transfer. It's a conflict of interest. The school board doesn't want any favoritism. Plus, Izuku urged when it seemed like Shinsu wouldn't continue. "I'm still in remedial courses. My grades are improving, but if anyone from 1B would transfer to 1A, it'd be the top student. And there are a few students in 1B that would cause a lot of trouble if they found out I just skipped the order." Shinsu seemed pretty bummed about it and Izuku couldn't help but feel the same. But you could get there, right? Bring your grades up enough and prove you're worthy of being in 1A. Such a sweet little optimist. Nana cooed to him, making Izuku blush. Shinsu shrugged. I guess. But it would take time. They could make it happen. Izuku was sure of it. Underscore underscore underscore. Walking into Izuwa's class, several students started to get out of their seats and rush over to Izuku, only to be stopped by Izuwa's glare. Stay in your seats. All of you. Izuku froze as Izuwa's attention was directed at him. What was the hold up? Well, I went to Recovery Girl like I was told yesterday after lunch. She healed my shoulder as best as she could and she asked Shinsu to walk me to class in case I was too exhausted. Izuku explained, walking over to his desk where his backpack laid. Most likely thanks to Itza. Izuwa seemed to take the excuse as it was and dismissed Shinsu with a note for his homeroom teacher. That done, he turned to face the students in his own class and spoke. All right. Now that the media is dealt with and all our classmates are here, let's talk about the remaining class roles. As the representative and deputy, Midoriya and Yaoyorozu, please step forward. Oh, he had forgotten about that. Great. Underscore underscore underscore. Izuku was never more glad to be home than he was that day. It had taken even longer than usual, seeing as how Itza wanted to walk him home to carry his bag. And since Itza wanted to go, that meant Yurarika wanted to tag along as well. And then Azui of course wasn't left out. Izuku barely stopped his entire class from following him home. It was nice of course, having so many people who cared about his well-being and were interested enough in him to want to see where he lived, but so many people would just be too much. My mom is a very nervous person and I don't want to overwhelm her. Especially after the media break-in today. Izuku said in apology. That sounds fair. We wouldn't want to upset her. I'm sure she's already worried enough after the training battles. Kirishima accepted with a sharp-toothed smile. Everyone seemed to agree with that as well as they finally unblocked to way out of the classroom. Izuku was mostly quiet as he led the way down the street. He could hear Yurarika and Azui conversing about what Izuku's mother was like behind him. Midoriya, can I ask you something? It might be a little rude. Itza asked, face reddening slightly at the thought of potentially being rude. And you don't have to answer if you don't want to. Curiosity piqued, Izuku slowed down. What is it? Itza cleared his throat, resettling Izuku's bag in his arms. Where is your father? You haven't mentioned him at all. Oh, that. Izuku shrugged, honestly expecting something worse. He's working overseas in America. Has been for a long time. I don't really know what he does, but Mom says he's really busy, which is why I haven't seen him in years. Years. Yurarika butted in, probably listening from the start. I can't imagine what that would be like. Don't you miss him terribly? Izuku shrugged again. Not, really. Wadash. All three of his friends' jaws dropped in surprise. What do you mean not really? It's nothing personal or anything. He's been gone since I was a little kid. My mom's always been there for me for everything, I just never felt like I needed a dad, I guess. Izuku tried to explain. I don't hate him or anything. I just never depended on him for anything. Sure, he sends money to my mom to help her pay bills and stuff, but that's it. There was silence as his friends began following him again. It was only broken by Azui as they were approaching his building. I don't think it's that weird that you don't miss your dad, Kuro. You don't? No. You say your mom took care of everything you needed this entire time. You didn't need your dad. Your mom must care about you a lot to fulfill both parental roles so easily, Kuro. It was the most Izuku had heard her say at once. Izuku was significantly happier as he made his way to his door and unlocked it with a key. Mom. I'm home. I brought a few friends that would like to meet you. She looks so shocked. Nana said fondly. There was a clatter of pans as Izuku's mom rushed into the room. Oh. I had no idea you were bringing friends home, Izuku. I would have prepared more food. Here, I'll go get some guest slippers. Oh, no ma'am, that's all right. Eureka said quickly. We can't stay. We were just walking Midoriya home. We've heard so much about you, we just had to meet you in person, Kuro. Allow us to introduce ourselves. My name is Itza Tenya, Itza said quickly as he bowed to Inko. Oh. I'm Eureka Okako. Eureka bowed next. And I'm Azui Tsuyu. Azui followed. Inko looked between the three as if they had gifted her the rarest diamonds. Her eyes shined with tears. I'm Izuku's mother. I'm so glad to see that Izuku has made such respectful friends. The three lifted from their bows with a smile. We are honored to have your son as a friend. He will truly be a great hero. Itza praised. Izuku blushed at the flattery as he took his bag from Itza and placed it on the couch. You three will have to come by for dinner sometime. I can tell you stories about when Izuku was younger. Inko seemed ready to embarrass Izuku right then and there, and he couldn't have that. Luckily, they weren't able to stay long enough for her to bring out the baby pictures. He liked that he had friends, but he had emotionally been through way too much. He was ready to lay down. His mom seemed to see that in his face as she urged him to go upstairs and take a quick nap before dinner. He didn't need to be told twice. _____. As soon as the door shut behind him, Izuku kicked off his shoes and laid down on his bed with his uniform still on. What he didn't expect was the blanket of warmth that came over him so suddenly. Nana? He asked, slowly reaching up as if to hug the warmth. What's going on? Izuku heard a sniffle and couldn't help but panic. Nana, what's happening? Why are you crying? Izuku, I'm so sorry. I was so afraid and I hurt you. Nana stuttered out as she sobbed. It's okay. Izuku said immediately. Because it was, a little nosebleed was nothing if it meant he was keeping others safe. I don't know what had you so scared, but it'll be okay. I promise. Whatever it is, we can fix it. There was silence as Nana cried over Izuku's body. Izuku wished more than ever that he could hug Nana. Or even just offer her the slightest bit of comfort that she did him on a daily basis. It was so frustrating that he felt tears gather in his own eyes. This can't be fixed, Izuku. My son, he's dead. No. No, he couldn't be. We just left All Might that note though. You told him to look . Because his descendant was the one who broke into the school. Nana was done crying, now her voice was cold and numb. I hide a lot of things about the spirit world from you, Izuku. It's not pretty. Not everyone is like me. And, nobody like me ever stays like me for long. Izuku was at loss for words, but it didn't matter as Nana continued her explanation. I saw him standing there. My grandson. And he looked like a shell. I couldn't even recognize him at first. Izuku tried once more to reach out to her and hug her when he heard her voice tremble. But there were spirits all around him. Tortured spirits. They were reaching out to him and I could feel their emotions. They were terrified. And I could see. She stopped to cry a little more at the thought. I could see my little boy among them. But he was all grown up. I know it was him. I could feel it. Izuku felt his tears leak down his own cheeks while sadness filled his heart. No, Nana spoke of her child like they were an angel. She gave up so much for him. Even her life. Yes. It was him. That's how I knew. Most of the spirits there, they were family. I didn't know who they were, but we were connected somehow. And they knew that too. They knew. Izuku couldn't help but whimper, seeming to feel that there was an even worse realization coming. They knew, and they were reaching out to me. Trying to pull me in. I felt my bond with you strain. I was afraid it would break and I'd be sucked into them. Izuku was fully crying now. Small sobs shaking his shoulders as he grasped for thin air. Nana adjusted her warmth until Izuku felt what he knew to be her hands resting on his cheeks. Sweetie, I would never let that happen, do you hear me? Never. That's why I ran back to you. The pair held each other as best as they could. But it was hard. Their bond was so important, but it was clear there were things that could tear them apart. You said that spirits like you don't stay like you for long. What does that mean? Izuku asked, but he was sure he didn't want to know the answer. It means, spirits eventually turn into wisps of themselves. They're more spirit than soul. I've never had that problem because One for All keeps the holder's spirits pure. But there was a glaring issue there. You're not tied to One for All anymore. I know, but I won't fall like those other spirits. I swear to you. Her voice was full of conviction, but Izuku felt doubt. It seemed like spirit world business was a lot stronger than he thought it was. And that villain. Nana's grandson. He would be trouble. They were both knocked from their thoughts as a small knock came from Izuku's door. Izuku. Dinner's ready. Okay, Mom. I'll be right out. Izuku told her as he scrubbed the tears from his cheeks. She was probably still beaming from Izuku's friends visiting. Izuku wasn't going to ruin that for her. Nana, do I look alright? Yes, sweetie. You look fine. Nana's voice was fond as Izuku felt her step away to a normal distance. Now go eat. You didn't get to finish lunch. You're a growing boy after all. Just like the somber mood was lightened. Not completely, but a little. Enough to keep them from feeling completely smothered by it. Discord link. HTTP URL. Chapter 20, Before. The next day, Izuku was on a mission. His friends could see it on his face as he kept quiet most of the day. He took diligent notes, of course, but he was noticeably more secluded. Eureka had tried to pull him from his shell with little success. Even Nana had tried her hand at it. In fact, it wasn't until Izuku had seen All Might ducking into a side room that he perked up. All Might? I need to talk to you. Izuku, what are you doing? Nana asked worriedly. All Might flinched back as he turned towards the excited student. Oh, it's you, young Midoriya. Well, I was just about to eat my lunch, would you like to eat with me? We can speak then. Izuku nodded as he turned to his friends. I'll catch up later, okay. Tell Shinsu where I am so he doesn't worry. Eureka looked like she wanted to protest, but the sudden bright smile on his face kept her from doing so. Itza was much the same as he nodded. You can count on us, Midoriya. Izuku, answer me. Nana was getting impatient. You can't tell him what I told you. I won't, Izuku thought quickly. I have a plan. As All Might let Izuku inside, they sat on a couple of couches and All Might started to make tea. Before Izuku could begin speaking, steam filled the air and All Might deflated into his smaller form. Sorry, my boy. I can't hold my form long, so I tend to drop it when I'm alone to save time. Oh, that makes sense, Izuku nodded. That's kind of what I came to talk to you about. All Might froze mid-pour. I see. Izuku nodded. If the offer was still on the table, I want to inherit your quirk. His voice was full of conviction and he only hoped All Might heard it too. All Might coughed quickly as he covered his mouth. That's a serious decision to make, my boy. Seems out of the blue for you. Izuku, is this about what we talked about last night? Izuku sighed both physically and mentally. I know. But I've been thinking about this for a while. With One for All, I can be a better hero. And, you know how you said it's a power stockpiling quirk? Izuku asked as he accepted a cup of tea. All Might paused. I said that? I don't remember having that conversation. Fuck. Izuku, really, this language needs to. I mixed up our conversations, Nana, he thought urgently as he scrambled to fix his mistake. Why yet? That night at the beach. You told me it stockpiles power. That's why it was a powerful quirk. There was a pause as All Might thought it over before shrugging. I guess I forgot. But, yes, One for All is a stockpiling quirk. Izuku relaxed slowly as he regained his train of thought. Well, I was also thinking about how One for All would affect my quirk. Right, All Might gave Izuku an indistinguishable look as he sipped his tea. We should also talk about the fact that you seem to have picked up a couple more quirks since we last spoke privately. It's not like that. Izuku was quick to defend. It's just one quirk. All of it? How? He seemed more exasperated than angry. I've racked my brain around it, but I can't figure out how it all works together. You've destroyed robots, cameras, lights. If I didn't know any better, I'd say you have One for All already. He always was smarter than people gave him credit for. Nana sighed as she settled down next to him on the couch. You're going to have to tell part of the truth. That day I jumped, Izuku paused as All Might flinched. I don't know how to explain it. You got back up without a scratch on you. All Might offered as he looked into his cup. Yeah, after I fell, I had an out-of-body experience. I saw everything around me. I saw you running towards me. I saw spirits ready to take me to the other side, I guess. But I was so angry at you. I didn't want you near me. I didn't want you to touch my body. So Izuku made a wild hand gesture. He wasn't sure how to explain it. Since then, I've been developing abilities. Aizawa said it was electromagnetism. That's how I can do the things I do. Good enough. I think so. All Might seem to consider it before he sighed. I have arrangements to make. And I've had things come up since the break-in yesterday. We'll have to put a pin in this conversation. Izuku's stomach dropped as he heard the exhaustion in All Might's voice. If you've changed your mind about giving me your quirk, I understand. He would. Izuku had turned down the opportunity of a lifetime, and now he was trying to change his mind for his own selfish reasons. Maybe it was the One for All holders telling All Might he wasn't worthy anymore. It was then that All Might's mood shifted as he got up from the couch. No. No. That isn't it at all, my boy. I still want you as my successor. Even more so now than before. I see what you've accomplished by yourself, and I know with One for All, you can accomplish so much more. He walked over to Izuku's side and kneeled down so they were eye level. But there are things I have to handle first. The sports festival is coming up soon. You'll have it before then, all right. Izuku hadn't realized he'd been digging his fingers into the fabric of the couch until they relaxed by his sides. Feeling about 100% better, he nodded. Okay. Before the sports festival. All Might shared a soft smile with him as he started to stand again. Since I made the offer, I never thought of changing my mind, you know? I suppose that's how my mentor felt when she picked me as her successor. I was quirkless and I felt like I had something to prove, but despite all my mistakes she never gave up on me. Damn right I didn't. Nana said with ironclad conviction. Now who swears too much? Izuku teased her, feeling a rush of heat against his shoulder. I've noticed my powers getting weaker as well. My time limit is still only a few hours though. I can't maintain my position in the air as I used to. Like when you grabbed onto me. It's doubled my response times. All Might sighed. I can tell you honestly, if I had given you my quirk before the school year had started, I would have been a completely different person. Izuku flinched. Is it possible for you to lose one for all before passing it on to a successor? His voice was worried. All Might paused for a moment before he shook his head. No, I don't believe so. I don't think it's ever been tested before, but if all else failed, one for all would lay dormant inside me until I passed it on. Izuku couldn't wait to add this new information into his one for all journal. Pretty soon, though, the lunch period was over and Izuku had to report back to homeroom before his friends sent out a search party. Thank you for the chat, All Might. My pleasure, my boy. I look forward to the next time. ______. By the time Izuku got to class, his friends were waiting for him by the door. As soon as Shinsu saw him, he marched over and shoved a plastic pouch into his hand. What's this? Izuku asked as he turns it over in his hand. A jelly pouch. I swiped it from my dad's stash when I heard you were skipping lunch. Now drink it? Shinsu said firmly before lowering his voice so the other students couldn't hear. I can't believe Nana just let you skip a meal like that. Hey. Izuku watched as Nana made Shinsu shiver. We were having a serious conversation. Izuku couldn't help but snicker as he twisted the cap off the jelly pouch and took a sip. It tasted like fruit punch, but thicker. Deciding it was palatable enough, Izuku actually began drinking it while he and Shinsu walked back over to the group. Hi, guy. I'm sorry about this morning. I didn't mean to worry you. Izuku ducked his head hoping his friends weren't too mad at him. Well, everything's alright now, isn't it? Eureka asked as she gave a small smile. Izuku nodded, reflecting her smile. Yeah, I had a talk with All Might and everything's fine. Then we can forgive you for worrying us? But Izuku's head shot up at that, expecting something bad to fall from Itsu's mouth. Let's not make a habit out of it. Oh, relief swept over Izuku's shoulders as he relaxed, taking another sip from the pouch. Of course. I promise. Get into class and stop blocking the doorway. Izua's voice interrupted the four. Shinsu, I'll write you a note this time, but next time you're on your own. Itsu and Eureka rushed into the classroom to avoid further trouble with Shinsu right behind them, but Izua's hand on his shoulder kept Izuku from following. Sir, he asked worriedly. Was he in trouble? Midoriya, I won't ask for details about your mood this morning, but my office is open after classes always if you need to speak to me. Izuwa spoke with the same drone voice as always, but this time it seemed a little calmer and it soothed Izuku's nerves. As for your mandatory sessions with the counselor, we're still seeing where to fit them into your schedule. Why yes, sir. I'm okay now though. I was just apologizing to Itsu and Eureka for worrying them. Izuwa nodded to his words and Izuku was sure that was the end of it before Izuwa spoke once more. For future reference, just know that UA catalogs the eating habits of every student. It's how the teachers know if one of their students are having issues at home and can't afford food. Izuku was quick to correct. Oh, Mr. Izuwa, I'm fine. My mom and I have plenty of food at home, I just I know that, problem child. Izuwa interrupted back. But the school still marks you if you skip a meal. Get too many marks and you'll have to be supervised during lunch to make sure you eat. Silence spread between the two as Izuku processed the new information. He could understand why such a practice was used, but he was fine. He just skipped one meal. And Shinsu brought him Shinsu brought me this. I didn't ask him to Izuku's defense was silenced as Izuwa chuckled. The sound was surprisingly jarring to Izuku's ears. Hitachi isn't as sneaky as he likes to think he is. I know he took it. But like I said, there's no issue as long as you eat when you're supposed to. Now let's get into class before the bell rings. Aizawa quickly commanded the attention of all the students to make sure nobody paid too much attention to Izuku slinking back to his seat and finishing off the pouch. It was surprisingly filling for such a small package, and Izuku was better able to focus on the lesson than his hunger. Occasionally, Izuku would catch his friends giving him curious looks, but he made sure to give them a happy smile so that they didn't worry like last time. _____. Later that night when Izuku arrived at home, he couldn't help but lay in bed and think about the sports festival. It was an event that him and his mom watched every year, each cheering on random students they didn't even know and making predictions as to who would win. Izuku was always better at it, seeing as how his analysis skills were always improving. But he couldn't believe that All Might wanted to give him his quirk so soon. It was only a little ways away. And All Might said he'd have it before then. Izuku, why would you do something like that? Nana had scolded him as he thought over their conversation once more. Because, we needed to keep our bond safe. Izuku told her honestly. I don't want anything to take you away from me. And did you hear what All Might said? He hadn't even thought about giving it to someone else. If he's truly so tired as to give me one for all before the sports festival, then that means his time as the symbol of peace is running out. What if he Izuku's thoughts ran wild about all the worst case scenarios involving All Might and his skinny form. Anything could happen and All Might would be unable to defend himself. Would One for All fall into the wrong hands? Izuku, take it easy. I know how dangerous our situation is. I just never wanted you to take One for All without it being your choice. Nana sighed. It wasn't an ideal situation. But it was something neither of them could change. They needed One for All regardless of if they wanted it. That out of the way, Izuku was better able to reflect their conversation, better yet, his excuse to All Might about his quirk. It was something he had pulled out of thin air, but it was a good explanation. But Izuku needed to do research into electromagnetism. So far, all of his abilities seemed to be able to be explained away by it. Which brought him to the next train of thought. The next physical battle lesson. So far they'd had the quirk test that seemed to teach them their capabilities with their quirk. Then they had battle training which taught them a little of what they could do in a real battle. So what was next? Izuku would come to regret his excitement.
And 22, 23.
Chapter 21. The practical lesson came sooner than Izuku has expected, seeing as how he was looking forward to it so much. Especially since Recovery Girl cleared him to participate. His costume was trashed, but they were able to pull some parts off like his mask, gloves, and pads. Even so, Aizawa had warned them about using equipment they weren't comfortable with and how it could slow them down. Using his gym clothes in place of his suit, Izuku met his fellow classmates outside near the bus. Distantly, he registered Nana leaving his side to go towards the bus. Midoriya. Itza called out from behind him. Turning, Izuku saw the taller student approaching with his full armor on. His hand chopped the air as he spoke. Yeah, Itza. What's your boarding plan for the bus? He asked. Will we be going alphabetical or by student number? Or perhaps by dash? Ah, I didn't have a plan for that. Izuku's cheeks reddened. I figured we'd all just get in. Itza looked like he wanted to say something about that, but seeing as how he wasn't the class rep, he kept quiet. I see. Very well then. The bus is open seating anyway, Izuku. Wouldn't make much sense anyway. Nana informed. Pretty spacious too. It's an open seating bus, anyway. Izuku passed on with a shrug. Is that really an issue? Itza now looked confused. Open seating? How could you know that? Have you already been inside? Oh, Izuku could see he was close to messing up. Looking down at his feet, he quickly backtracked. Well, no, but you can see in the window, can't you? The seats are different, he said, almost a little unsure. He watched as Aitsa took a minute to stare at the window of the bus. Izuku felt himself almost start to sweat as he hoped Aitsa believed his story. So it is. That's a brilliant observation, Midoriya. Aitsa seemed to recover from whatever stupor he was in before only to turn to Izuku with a wide smile. Of course, I shouldn't be surprised that our class rep has such a keen eye. This made Izuku flush bright red, unused to the praise. It's not that big of a deal. Should I come up with a seating arrangement or something dash? Midoriya, Aitsa interrupted. I have to apologize again. I lost the vote for class rep and yet I sit here undermining your confidence as our leader. Izuku almost had backlash from the change in emotions Aitsa was going through at such a rapid pace. That paired with Aitsa's usual intensity created a hurricane of emotion. Aitsa was now looking off to the side, almost in shame. His body was stiff with his arms at his sides as if waiting to bow. Izuku couldn't imagine why. It was a simple misunderstanding. Aitsa, really, it's all right. You were more prepared for this role than I am. As I said, I voted for you. You expected me to have a plan as any class rep would dash. Luckily he was saved from making the conversation even worse as Aizawa announced that they needed to board. Get on the bus or we'll leave you behind. The threat was flat, but everyone piled in all the same. Izuku took a seat near the front, feeling Nana settle in right next to him. Pretty soon all the seats were filled with their class, most taking the time to sit near their friends and chatting among themselves. Izuku was content to bask in the gentle chatter. He felt Nana's arm come around his shoulders, filling him up with warmth. As the doors finally closed, Izuku ended up sitting the closest to the front with Tsu next to him. On the other side of her was Todoroki. They took turns pestering Aizawa about where they were going, but the teacher was pretty dead set on keeping them in the dark. You'll just have to pay attention and find out when we get there. Now let me nap or I'll make you get out and walk the rest of the way. Again, a hollow threat, but it got everyone to back off. Most of the ride was passed with the same gentle chatter until he was nudged gently by Tsu at his side. Hey, Midoriya, can I ask you a question? Izuku was confused but nodded along anyway. Tsu hardly ever spoke in their group, but when she did she always had something important to say. So he was curious about what she could want to know. Sure, Tsu. Azui was quiet for a moment as she collected her thoughts before speaking. What exactly is your quirk? Until that point, Izuku wasn't aware that other people were listening in until Kirishima piped in as well. Come to think of it, I'm kinda curious about that too. He leaned in closer from his seat across the aisle. Now that there was cross-aisle interaction, the rest of the class seemed to want to chime in. Each slipping in their questions and ideas about Izuku's possible quirk. Didn't you say it was something along the lines of self-levitation? Uraraka tried to back him up, but before Izuku could agree and let that be the end of it, Kirishima spoke once more. Well, yeah. That part is obvious, but there's got to be something more to it. I mean, have you seen how manly he is during a fight? With a nervous chuckle, Izuku shrugged. I've been developing my quirk, so what? But it's only the third week of school and you've seemed to surpass the rest of us already. Tsu pointed out. I'd say your quirk is as mysterious as All Might's. Wow. Smart girl. Then again, Izuku, you haven't exactly been subtle with your powers. With a lack of anything more to say, Izuku shook his head quickly. No way. My quirk isn't anything like his. It's just. How did he get All Might to stop asking questions? Tell the truth, but tell the wrong part of the truth. Exactly. I didn't get my quirk until recently. I was thought to be quirkless. But something triggered my quirk to come in, and that's why it seems so different than before. I'm still getting used to it. Izuku looked down at his lap, feeling shame rise within him. I'm sorry if it felt like I was lying. I'm just learning right now. It seemed like that was enough to distract them from asking him more questions, as everyone rushed to assure him that they never thought he was lying. They were just curious. Midoriya, I think I speak on behalf of us all when I say that we greatly admire your resilience and determination when it comes to learning about your quirk while also trying to be a hero. Aitsu chimed in. Your dedication astounds me. Ashido nodded along. I wouldn't necessarily put it like that, but I think it's super cool that you're still learning. The subject thankfully turned as everyone split off to chatter about how they got their quirks and what their days were like afterward. Izuku was so relieved to get the attention off of himself. However, the relief was short-lived as he noticed Todoroki staring at him from over Tsu's head. He didn't even look away when Izuku caught him staring, which made Izuku's face turn even redder. What could Todoroki possibly be thinking? Izuku had told the truth. Everyone else can accept that, why couldn't Todoroki? Deep inside himself, Izuku feared the prejudice he experienced in middle school coming back. He had just started to gain friends. He didn't want to go back to being a Deku. I won't let that happen, sweetie, Nana assured him. Before Izuku could stop her, however, she left his side. Izuku wasn't sure what she was trying to do until he saw Todoroki jerking in his seat to look behind himself. The seat behind him was empty though. Todoroki, are you alright? Tsu asked with a hint of worry. Luckily, Todoroki waved her off. I'm fine, was the only reply she received. But it got Todoroki to stop staring at him, so Izuku counted it as a win. _____. It was a pretty short ride, all things considered. When the bus came to a halt, Izuku stood up from his seat, immediately gaining the attention of all the students. All right, remember you are UA students. Compose yourselves professionally and we won't have any problems. He droned. Group up at the entrance and wait for further instructions. Izuku was glad that Izuku handed out the instructions. Sure, Aitsu apologized for questioning him. But Aitsu had a point all the same. Izuku wasn't great with order and leadership. He definitely needed to improve that. After everyone exited the bus and gathered at the entrance, they were led into the rather unassuming building where someone Izuku recognized right away was waiting for them. That's the Space Hero, 13. Izuku whispered excitedly, practically shaking already. They're most known for disaster relief. Mr. Izuku, is that why we're here? Calm down, Midoriya, Izuku said, raising his hand slowly. Just listen and we'll explain. Immediately, Izuku's hand shot to cover his mouth. MMPH. He mumbled out an apology quickly before looking 13, eager to start the lesson. Well then, it seems like some of you know me already. But for those of you who don't, I'm the Pro Hero 13. They announced, giving a small pose. It's great to see so many bright young faces today. I can't wait to get started. A short look from Izuku kept everyone from jumping in to ask what exactly brought them there, allowing 13 the chance to continue speaking. If you look around, you'll see areas set up exactly like disaster zones. Landslides, shipwrecks, windstorms, and even fires. It looks like an amusement park. Kaminari shouted out, much to everyone else's agreement. Glad to see you like it. I designed this place to be somewhere to train young heroes like yourselves how to best help out in disaster situations. I call it Dash. Everyone's faces lit up even before she had finished speaking. The unforeseen simulation joint. But you can call it the USJ. There was a murmur about Universal Studios Japan, but Izuku stepped closer to 13, causing Izuku to pay closer attention. Isn't All Might supposed to be here? He asked 13, causing Izuku's stomach to drop. All Might was supposed to be there? But Izuku hadn't seen him at all that morning. The only news was that he had been pretty active with saving people that morning. But Aizawa seemed to sense his fear as he cleared his throat and pulled his capture weapon up to cover his mouth. Izuku was confused at first until Nana began speaking. He says not to worry. All Might will most likely make an appearance later. But what about the security issues? Izuku asked in his mind. But there was no way for him to voice those concerns without alerting his class. It was times like this that made him wish Nana could speak to other people. His fear was noticeable, it seemed, as Aizawa's face grew a little strained. A lot of work has gone into his building to make it so authentic. But it is secure, unlike in an actual rescue scenario. Aizawa stressed, looking mostly at Izuku. This is the practice. Remember, the real world has no safety measures. Izuku was only slightly reassured. Which brings me to my next point. 13 chimed in, none the wiser to the underlying conversation happening. Some of you might know, but my quirk is very powerful. It's called Black Hole. I can use it to suck up anything and turn it into dust. There was the expected chatter as the students around Izuku, especially Eureka, started discussing the uses for such a quirk. It was a nice atmosphere, but Izuku could tell there was more. Despite the uses it has for rescue operations, my quirk could be easily used to kill. 13 said suddenly, which ceased all talk immediately. In the silence, Aizawa stepped forward. You all know well enough how dangerous a quirk can be when you aren't careful. Izuku wasn't sure he liked the feeling of eyes on him he got suddenly from the entire class. It was as if they were able to see the burn through his shirt. To his relief, 13 took control of the conversation once more. You all have to keep in mind how deadly your quirks can be if you lose focus. That's also why we're testing your rescue skills here. You're going to learn how to save people's lives. It was obvious she was trying to lighten the mood a little, but it didn't work as well as Izuku figured she'd hoped. You won't be attacking enemies or each other in this exercise. You will only be using your quirks to help dash. Something isn't right, Nana said suddenly, cutting off Izuku's train of thought. As Izuku looked to Aizawa, the man shivered intensely. Nana must have walked through him. Aizawa's eyes shot over to Izuku and his panic must have shown on his face. Midoriya, what's dash? There's too much spirit activity here. Especially in the courtyard down there. It's overrun. Whatever Nana was doing directed Aizawa's attention down to the fountain. There was a second of deliberation in his eyes before he looked back over. Everyone get back to the bus. Now. He shouted, surprising the entire class. Even 13 was confused. That split second of hesitation turned out to be their undoing as the lights flickered and the fountain down below started to go haywire. A dark purple portal spiraled open right in front of it as well. With Aizawa's exclamation, it was clear to everyone else now that this wasn't part of the exercise at all. They were all entranced as they watched the scene unfold. The portal grew bigger and bigger until it was massive. Slowly, a single hand reached through, catching the edges of the portal and pulling it open even further, exposing an obscured face. Izuku trembled as the freezing cold terror he experienced from Nana came back full force. Izuku, that's him. Her voice was low and steady, but Izuku could feel her fear. Part of him reached out to her, wanting to make sure she wasn't going to be pulled away. One by one, people started walking out of the portal. 5, 10, 20, they just kept coming. And from Nana's observation, they all had spirits surrounding them. Whether or not they had the same pull as Nana's family, Izuku wasn't sure. He very much did not want to find out either. Finally, the man Nana pointed out stepped out. He was covered in hands. Several pairs actually. Izuku felt sick. And right behind him, a hulking mass stepped out as well. It looked like someone with a mutation quirk, but Izuku wasn't sure what it was supposed to look like. It was huge. Those are villains, Aizawa said gravely. 13. Keep the students safe. Izuku watched as Aizawa reached into his capture weapon and pulled out the infamous goggles he had modeled his mask after. Securing them on his face, Izuku was unable to see where he was looking. They would need a lot more than 2 heroes to defend them. They were doomed. Chapter 22. Izuku watched as the large portal shrunk down into the form of another villain. As if they weren't already outmatched. His dark smoky appearance did nothing to ease Izuku's nerves. Especially as he started to speak. All Might doesn't seem to be in attendance. His voice was cold enough to send chills down Izuku's back. Nana's grandson seemed very displeased by that. Maybe he'll show up if we kill a few students. They didn't stick around much longer as Aizawa ordered 13 to evacuate them all and get in touch with Yue for reinforcements. When he didn't move to follow them, Izuku froze. Aizawa, you can't seriously be thinking of fighting them. There's too many. Your fighting style dash. Whatever complaint Izuku had on the tip of his tongue was halted as he felt a hand grip onto his arm. Turning quickly, Izuku was ready to punch what his instincts felt like a villain only to see Aiza's stern gaze staring upon him. Midoriya, we don't have time to question the teachers. We have to go, come on. Izuku felt himself being pulled along and reluctantly followed. Nana, please stay with him. He thought, feeling her leave his side and hopefully staying with Aizawa as long as possible. Eventually, when Aiza felt that Izuku wasn't going to run back into the fight, he let go of Izuku's arm. However, 13 stayed behind the group, making it impossible to lag behind to see how Aizawa was managing. He's holding his own just fine, Izuku. Don't worry. They can't even touch him. He's clearly experienced with group fights. Nana assured, and Izuku felt his panic recede. He should put his trust in Yue to know how to protect them, he realized. They knew there might be an attack. So they planned for that. Can you help him? There was an answering pull of energy before it dissipated just as suddenly. I'll lend a hand when I can. But, Izuku, I can't get close to some of these villains. Most of them seem to be inexperienced thugs. But they have some very bad people on their side. Izuku made it clear he didn't want Nana to put herself in danger of snapping their bond. Especially since Aizawa seemed to have such a good handle on the situation. Rushing to the entrance of the USJ, safety seemed so close. Everyone looked to be relaxing. As if getting to the other side of the gate would mean they were untouchable. That peace was soon shattered as another one of those void-like portals opened up in the ground in front of them. Everyone stopped dead in their tracks, allowing 13 to push through to stand guard in front of them. There is no escape, the villain mocked as they emerged from the portal. Their bodies seemed to snap up all the light in the area around them, making them seem larger and larger by the moment. We are the League of Villains dash. An organization. Of course. That's why there was such a stark difference in power. The thugs were serving the true members. I know it's impolite, but we decided to invite ourselves inside this haven of justice to say hello to the most promising heroes of the future. Such a fitting space for All Might to take his last breath. In front of him, while everyone was reeling at the information given to them, Izuku noticed Kirishima's shoulders tense up, as if immediately Izuku's hand shot out to grab the armor on his shoulder. Kirishima jerked forward before realizing he was caught and turned to glare at Izuku. What are you dash? You'll get yourself killed. Izuku hissed, feeling anger rise within him. They had no idea what this villain was capable of, and they knew this league had no problem killing children. Well, we have to do something dash. Ah, planning in front of your enemy. That's not very smart, children. You should be careful before someone gets hurt. The villain sneered at them as its form grew larger and larger. If you're so eager to fight, I'll scatter you across the compound to meet some of our compatriots. The void swirled all around them, encasing them in darkness. It was like wind whipping through their hair and making it hard to keep their balance, let alone form an attack plan. Izuku raised his hands trying to block the particles from getting in his face, only to feel the warmth of the sun. Opening his eyes, he saw what looked to be a mountain range above him. Above. Looking around, Izuku cried out upon seeing himself being lowered out of a portal high above the ground. In the distance, he could see the large mass of the villain and several more portals open up across the facility. But his thoughts were interrupted as he suddenly found himself falling through the air. Preparing to use his quirk to catch himself, he heard the sounds of screams from above. Upon looking up, 3 others were falling with him. He couldn't make out all of them, but he could see Kirishima's flaming red hair. He looked to be trying to harden his whole body, but Izuku just knew that wouldn't work. Kirishima! Izuku screamed, feeling his throat protest harshly. But he could barely hear over the roaring wind in his ear. He had to make sure he was heard. There wasn't time to freak out. Kirishima! At that, Izuku saw his head jerk over and their eyes locked. It only took Izuku reaching a hand out toward him for Kirishima to get the plan. Straightening his body, Kirishima fell faster until Izuku was able to grab onto the bulky shoulder straps of his uniform. Kirishima grabbed onto the fabric of Izuku's gym uniform and they quickly shifted. Kirishima was laying with his back to the mountains while Izuku was above him face to face. There was a split second of panic before they both activated their quirks. Izuku found himself lucky that the USJ was rigged up to so much electricity as he reached through his bond with Nana and pulled as much as he could into his own body. This was nothing like the entrance exam. This was supposed to work. If he could just use that energy to fuel his gravity reduction, he could, in theory, reduce their speed of falling enough for Kirishima's hardening to only absorb the minimum impact. But Izuku had never tried to carry someone before. And there was no telling how much force Kirishima's quirk could take. Closing his eyes in fear, Izuku tried activating his levitation to its fullest extent, too afraid to watch for the moment of impact. The landing was harsh. All at once there was no sound of wind shooting all around them and Izuku braced his whole body. The impact knocked Izuku's hold off Kirishima, leaving them no choice but to separate. Izuku was jerked to the side and he felt pebbles scrape across his face before he was able to raise his arms to protect himself. Rapidly, he started skidding down what he felt was the side of a mountain. With no idea what height it was, Izuku activated his quirk once more despite the headache brewing to hopefully float above the cliffside. Only when he was sure he wasn't about to crash into a boulder did he open his eyes to see himself hovering once more above the orange rock of the terrain. He was quick to float back down before the headache and nausea took over, gently lowering himself to the ground. Izuku swore he would never take having a stable ground for granted again as he caught his breath. Izuku! Are you alright? Are you hurt? Izuku was never more glad to hear Nana than he was at that moment. But even so, his heart wouldn't calm down. I'm fine. Where's Kirishima? He asked as he dusted off his own body, wiping the inevitable drips of blood from his nose. A little ways behind you. He looks all right, and last I saw him he was getting up as well. With a nod, Izuku turned around and jogged over to his fellow classmate. Kirishima dash. Whatever he was going to say was cut off by arms wrapping around him tightly. You're a genius, Midoriya. Can you imagine what would have happened if no wait, let's never think of that again. It was clear that Kirishima was high off the adrenaline of a near-death experience, but they had bigger things to worry about. Did you see who else was falling? Before Kirishima could answer there was a yell from above them. Make room. Get out of the way. Izuku didn't think twice as he jumped out of the vicinity. Looking up he saw the large shadow of a parachute gliding across the sky. Upon further inspection, it was Momo carrying Jiro, who looked suitably terrified of falling. As the pair landed, Momo tossed off the parachute back with a heavy sigh. Glad we made it in one piece. Are you too hurt? Momo asked, specifically looking at the blood smeared on Izuku's face. No, I'm fine. This just happens when I use my quirk too much. He explained nervously. Sorry, I didn't try to help you. I didn't even think I could carry Kirishima, let alone 2 more people. Momo cut him off with shoving a napkin in his face, which he took gratefully and held it to his nose. It's fine. We managed. No sense in dwelling on the past. We have to focus on getting back to 13. Or finding our other classmates. Smart move. Nana, can you find any of our classmates around? Izuku asked her. I think we should go back first. Anybody we find on the way, we can take with us, but if we all try to look for each other, it'll just be a waste of time. He told the group. A waste of time. Kirishima blurted out. Villains are attacking and you think looking for our classmates is a waste of time. Izuku. You all need to run. There are villains all around. They're waiting to attack. Nana interrupted his thoughts. But her warning came too late. Before Izuku could even open his mouth to speak his concern, an explosion rocked the boulder at the top of the cliff, sending it rolling down the steep towards them. It wasn't hard to bolt out of the way as it started rolling down, but that meant they were spread out when the villains started appearing all around. Oh wow! There's a bunch over here. Someone, a villain with some kind of wolf mutation quirk, growled out. Izuku shivered as he licked his jowls hungrily at them. From there was no time to come up with a plan. It was very much just a fight for their lives. It didn't help much that Izuku wasn't sure which villains would be affected by his quirk. Kirishima's hardening worked well to block attacks, Jiro's speakers were amazing with the offense, and Yoyorozu's quirk was useful for weapons. In the end, Izuku grabbed a police baton from Yoyorozu and used that. He was already reaching his limit as it was, so he was saving his reserves for a dire emergency. By the end of the battle, he was sweating and panting profusely. But he continuously pushed himself past his limit. This was what his training was supposed to do. He was supposed to be stronger. Nana's encouragement rang off in his head every time he felt that he was getting too weak, and like an adrenaline shot, he found the strength to keep going. Slamming the baton into the nearest enemy, he watched them collapse with a groan before Kirishima dealt the knockout blow to send them to the ground. Everything seemed to be going well. And like a fool, Izuku let his guard down once more. Izuku, there was no time for a warning before a large hand clamped down onto his freshly scarred shoulder. The flesh was still tender underneath, but no amount of thrashing could help him get away. Izuku realized he was truly caught as another large hand reached up and gripped his neck from behind. Nobody make any sudden moves? Do you hear me? That means no quirks either. Drop your weapons or I'll fry this kid's brains. Izuku couldn't look over to see what the man was doing, but from the crackling sound and the smell of ozone right beside his face. The hand on his neck kept him still, but there was no mistaking it. Nana, can't you do something? He asked as he watched his classmates throw down their weapons. I don't know. What if it's too much for you to handle? I don't want to kill you again, Izuku. You won't. Izuku found himself muttering out loud only when the hand on his neck squeezed tighter. The villain sneered, leaning closer to Izuku's ear. I can assure you I would. But feel free to try me, you little runt. You know, you're a pretty lucky guy, Jiro said suddenly, dragging the villain's attention away from Izuku. Oh yeah? Why's that? For a moment, Izuku was confused. But as soon as he saw the look on Jiro's face, he got her plan. The only issue was that she was being too obvious. Jiro shrugged, trying to be nonchalant. You electric quirk types are always destined for mainstream success. Even if you didn't want to be a hero, there's plenty of other jobs you could do right. Her stalling seemed to be working as Izuku felt the hand on him lessen just a little. Maybe even enough for him to get. Nice try. The villain hissed, and Izuku tensed upon feeling the electricity buzzing near his face once more. Think you can distract me so easily? I'm not some dumb thug like the rest of them. Emiko. Emiko. Izuku repeated, confused. The villain immediately tensed up. What did you just say to me? Emiko. Izuku didn't know what it was he was doing, but it seemed to be working. There was silence, as even his classmates weren't sure what he was doing. How do you? With the villain confused, Izuku took the opportunity to jerk out of his grasp. The electricity brushed against the back of his neck as he pulled away, but Nana sapped it without even asking Izuku first. He felt the raw power seep into his skin, and he used it to fuel his strength as he burst out. There was the intense pain in his head, but it faded as soon as the energy left his system. Izuku fell to the ground in what he hoped to be a safe distance away before Jiro activated the speakers on her legs. The sound was jarring and harsh to Izuku's ears, but it sure beats having his brains scrambled. Just like that, the villain was taken down. And there was a slight screech of feedback from hidden speakers before an alarm rang out through the air. Alert! Intruders detected. Lockdown deployed. His classmates rushed over him soon after, quickly helping him to his feet. There was a feeling of warmth dripping down his face. Ah! Another nosebleed. Izuku didn't much care but accepted the tissue given to him by Yaoyorozu regardless. As we were saying, we should get back to Aizawa and 13. He reiterated. It was the most logical choice, but he was surprised by the reluctance in their eyes as they glanced at him. What? I think we should look for our friends. Kirishima blurted. Right now, the most dangerous place seems to be the entrance. It'll be better to group up with the others first. Jiro and Yaoyorozu both nodded their agreement, which stunned Izuku. There was no way to know if the entrance was the most dangerous place at the moment. Aizawa could have dispatched all the villains and was waiting for them now. Izuku sighed. How about this? I'll go to the entrance alone. I'll lay low and see if it's safe. While I'm gone, you three can go find our classmates and bring them back here. The other three shared looks before nodding. Yeah, you seem pretty tapped out. You'll bring less attention if it's just you. Jiro pointed to his bloody shirt. Come back and wait for us if you get into trouble, Kirishima warned. Yaoyorozu gave Izuku a once-over before she reached for her arm. Light emanated from it as she created a small object and handed it to Izuku. Here. This is a communications device. I'm not sure if it'll work in here with the lockdown, but try to use this if you get caught. It looked relatively simple. A small antenna sat at the top with a small dial for the different frequencies. And finally, there was a button that Izuku knew was for the actual communication. Thanks. I'll let you guys know if anything happens. Izuku slipped the communicator into his pocket. _____. The way to the entrance was clear, thankfully. Izuku didn't run into any villains, but he also didn't run into any classmates. His nose had stopped bleeding along the way as well. Nana, how is Aizawa doing? Izuku asked as they started to get closer. There was the pull as he felt her leave his side. He's tired. But he's still holding out. There's only a few lower thugs, my grandson, and that big thing that came with them. I can't see any souls yet though. Maybe if we dash. Whatever she was about to say was cut off by a horrified gasp. Izuku was about to question what she saw when he found it himself. Somehow, in the span of the last few seconds, the large beast had gotten the drop on Aizawa. It was now crouched over his back, almost obscuring him from view. Izuku watched, unable to turn his head away as it grabbed Aizawa's arm and squeezed it hard enough for the bone to shatter. The cry of pain Aizawa let out stabbed Izuku deep inside. He needed to do something. Izuku, don't. Just stay back. Nana cried out. You can't do anything. You'll be killed. He knew that. Of course, he knew that. But maybe if he could buy them a little more time. There was the chance that someone called for help. The interference was gone, right? They just needed more time. His body moved without thinking as he took a step forward. Luckily, all the villains were occupied watching whatever that thing was destroy Aizawa's body. Stop. Izuku, I'm begging you, please. Don't fight. You can't see, but that thing isn't human. I can't help you any, you've already reached your limit. So he was just supposed to watch Aizawa die? The man that's done more for him than any of his previous teachers. He couldn't. Another step forward and he could see the teleporter appear beside the ringleader. Their words were inaudible, but whatever it was seemed to piss the leader off as he started to scratch his neck manically. Maybe the reinforcements had arrived. So that meant Izuku really did only have to buy a little more time. Aren't you listening? I said stop it. You can't win. He didn't have to win. That was the thing. He just had to make sure they didn't lose. The villains saw him now. But Izuku didn't care. All he wanted was to save Aizawa long enough to keep him from being killed. Reaching out, he latched onto the electricity sparking underneath their feet. His head pulsed in pain, but he pushed through it once more. A new player enters the combat zone, huh? The leader spoke in a raspy breath that sent chills down his spine. What are you going to do? You've already taken a beating, it seems. Do you really think you can stop us? Or are you volunteering to be the first to die? Neither. Izuku, please. Nana was crying. But Izuku couldn't worry about that. Instead, he forced the energy into his own body, fueling his speed and jumping up in the air with the help of his levitation. Deactivating it as soon as he reached above the beast, he started to fall. Let him go. Izuku screamed, forcing all the energy he had into punching the thing right in its exposed brain. Dying hurt a lot more the third time around. Sorry. Chapter 23. Somehow in the span of a second, the beast reached an arm up and grabbed Izuku around the waist. Its hand was huge enough to encompass Izuku's entire torso, and no amount of punching or kicking budged its grip. Kill him, Nomua. The leader hissed. There was the sound of horrified screams filling the air. Izuku wasn't sure if it was Nana or himself. He was too focused on his rib cage folding in on itself like an aluminum can. There was no strain from the beast, Nomu apparently, as it crushed his abdomen without a second thought. Izuku couldn't breathe. Did he even have lungs anymore? He was dead before Nomu even tossed him aside like a broken doll. He watched in the third person as his body clattered across the concrete, mangled, bloody, and lifeless. He was unrecognizable. No. No. Please. Nana's voice rang out. Please. Izuku looked away from his body to see Nana near the leader. Not by her choice, it seemed. But she could do nothing as the hands of several dark shadows grabbed onto her body and pulled her closer. Instinctively, Izuku reached through their bond for any energy he could. The only thing he found, however, was that of the Nomua. He could finally understand what Nana meant. While the spirits dragging Nana were distinctive and silhouetted, the spirits of the Nomua were all jumbled together, wriggling and thrashing like a worm. In between the spirits were bright white lines that looked almost like threads sewing them in place. At once, they let out a sad moan. Nana was wrong. The Nomua might not have been human anymore. But it used to be. Izuku. Izuku. Nana's cries grabbed his attention once more. She had finally seen him standing there beside his body and was reaching out to him with both hands. I don't want to be one of them. Please. Izuku moved without thought, suddenly calling upon their bond once more for strength. He gripped onto Nana's hands. He couldn't feel anything other than the pressure of the contact. Without dwelling on it, he started to pull, calling on any strength he could muster. The only way he could describe it was like fighting through molasses. Every one of his movements was delayed. but he seemed to be making progress. Ours dash. She's ours. Can't have her dash. Give her back. Izuku heard a cacophony of voices say at once. No. She's mine. He spat with childish defiance as he pulled with all his might. With luck, he gained some purchase until finally, Nana was free of the grabbing hands. The pair scrambled away, but luckily it seemed that the spirits couldn't move that far from their host. They stretched out, hands grasping, but they couldn't reach. Izuku took the moment to look around at the scene. There were the gore and viscera of his own body and remains on Nomura. And time seemed to move just as slowly as it usually did in this in-between of the spirit world. But enough time had passed for his body to be seen by Aizawa, who barely managed to lift his head. Izuku could see he was close to passing out, but there were also wisps all around him. Like photographs layered on top of each other. He's hanging in there, Izuku, but, Nana explained, her arms wrapping around Izuku tightly. We have to get back, Izuku said as he reached for his own body. Wait. Nana's words stopped him. Maybe now's not the time. We can wait here till the reinforcements arrive. They couldn't do that. They'd be here forever. Time moved so slowly. There was no telling what would happen. Actually, Noma would probably finish Aizawa off and then anyone else in the vicinity. Izuku couldn't let that happen. Izuku, Nana said with tears in her eyes. Izuku paused, taking a moment to look over at the woman who watched over him for so long. She was the same as the first day they met. The same hero costume and everything. The only difference was the anguish in her eyes. It was even greater than when she was crying over his body the first time. I have to. He told her, taking a few selfish moments to hug her tightly around the waist. Her arms wrapped around him with the same desperation. He felt her lips press against the top of his head gently. I know you do, I just hate seeing you hurt. Nana walked him over to his body and Izuku watched her intentionally look away. As before, they reached for the body together, and when they made contact, a bright light flashed behind Izuku's eyes. He opened his eyes, feeling the cool blood crusting on his face. It was disgusting and one of the worst parts of the whole ordeal. But his body was repaired. Seemingly without a scratch. No ache in sight. It was as he sat up that he heard a large crash towards the entrance doors. It's him. Everyone paused to watch as All Might stepped through the broken doors. It was like the light at the end of the tunnel. The reason Izuku put himself in the position of danger in the first place. He succeeded. Fear not, students. I am here. All Might announced, and his deep voice carried down to the plaza. It was music to Izuku's ears. Well, well, well. Looks like we're having a boss battle after all. The leader hissed. None of their attention was on him, so Izuku took the opportunity to dive off the side of the ledge, hoping to gain some cover. What he didn't expect, however, was to see Azui and Mineta there as well. The water around him immediately turned red as his blood was washed off. But he still must have looked a mess, seeing as how the look of horror was prominent. Hoping to at least make himself look less disgusting, Izuku ducked his head under the water. Shaking around, he tried to scrub the majority of the blood away from his face. His clothes were a goner, but he still held out hope. When he finally resurfaced, there wasn't much he could say before he felt himself being yanked up by his uniform. His instinct immediately told him to start fighting, but upon looking up, he saw it was All Might who had a hold of Eve. In one fell swoop, All Might was able to grab Izuku, Mineta, Azui, and Aizawa before depositing them near the entrance. Carry Aizawa out of here, students. Leave these villains to me. Before Izuku could mention anything about his time limit, All Might blasted off and jumped straight into battle. That proved easier said than done, as All Might landed a Carolina smash right on Nomu's chest. But like before when Izuku was struggling, the beast wasn't even phased. All Might tried several more punches only for them to harmlessly bounce off. Izuku turned to Azui, intending on helping her hold onto Aizawa, but when he took a step towards her she took a step back. Tsu? What? Izuku asked, feeling a dread pool in his stomach. What are you? Some kind of zombie freak? Mineta blurted out loudly. We just watched you get crushed and here you are completely fine? What the heck? Izuku cursed heavily in his mind despite the scolding from Nana. Of all things, he had hoped they hadn't seen him die. But it seemed like it was only a matter of time before people started to uncover his secret quirk. It's not like that. My quirk is now isn't the time to explain. Izuku finally huffed. Without Azui's help, he scooped up Aizawa's front half and started to carry him. We have to get to the others. The other two were reluctant to come near him, but slowly they managed to look past what had happened and help him with Aizawa. Nana's urging in his ear, Izuku didn't stop to peek behind him no matter how much he wanted to. He had to get Aizawa out of there. From what he saw as a spirit, Aizawa didn't have much time. _____. Shigaraki Tomura watched the battle with excitement tingling in his bones. He has been preparing for this for years. The fall of the symbol of peace. Despite their rocky start, he finally seemed to have the first checkpoint in his grasp. Kill the symbol of peace, watch Hero Society crumble, rule the world. That last part was a filler for his real plan, of course. It was in the works. And he was off to such a great start. Infiltrating UA was easier than he thought. With all the reporters there for All Might, it was easy to get them to distract the staff and students long enough for him to sneak in and steal All Might's schedule. And with Kurogiri's portals, he was in and out before anyone could get suspicious. And now here he was in the stupid training facility. They'd made a statement. Despite their issues, they even ended up killing a kid. His satisfaction was obvious as he taunted All Might about his Nomua. Perhaps he gave away a little too much, but that didn't matter seeing as how All Might would soon be dead just like that annoying little brat. Shigaraki's thoughts halted as he turned to look at where the boy's body used to be. It was pretty gross looking, he remembered. It would have surely made a statement to UA. But, the body wasn't there. The puddle of blood was, but not the body. Shigaraki stomped over before he saw the trail of blood leading to the water. Nearest the ledge it was pink and muddy with it. Had the brat managed to survive and crawl into the water? And drowned? Kurogiri. Shigaraki snarled, the sounds of fights behind him mere background noises. The purple mist villain materialized beside him almost immediately. Yes, Shigaraki. Don't yes, Shigaraki, me. Where's the brat's body? He demanded. Immediately, Kurogiri looked up to the entrance where Shigaraki had forgotten All Might had taken Eraserhead and those other two brats. He hadn't much cared if they escaped, but even from the distance, he could see the blood-stained uniform of the brat he swore was dead 5 minutes ago. Grab him. The order came swiftly. Are you sure you should be worrying about Dash? Don't question me. Kurogiri sighed, but Shigaraki saw his portal swirl near the students. They didn't seem to be paying attention and that green-haired brat stepped right into it. Shigaraki wasted no time in yanking him though by his foot, making sure to only use 4 fingers. The boy's body fell with a thud onto the concrete plaza and Shigaraki reveled in his look of surprise. Thought you could get away, huh? Shigaraki had to admit, the boy was turning out to be interesting. So what's your quirk? Duplication. Illusion. You're supposed to be dead. Leaning closer, Shigaraki felt the boy's leg twitch as if thinking of kicking him. And he couldn't have that. Grabbing the leg in both hands, Shigaraki smirked. I wouldn't fight. Killing you for real would be just as easy as Dash. With that, he lowered his pinky onto the boy's shoe and watched it crumble away into dust. The brat was smart. Shigaraki was pleased to see that as he stopped his resistance. All Might Shigaraki sang out as he grabbed the brat by the back of his stupid uniform and jerked him to his feet. Look what I have. Shigaraki reveled in the look on All Might's face when he saw the brat. He thought he had gotten him to safety. But before All Might could charge over like he clearly wanted to, Nomu went to attack. The sight was fun to watch. You can't do this, the brat choked out as Shigaraki wrapped an arm around his neck, holding him in place. As if you could stop me. Shigaraki hissed out. But you're just an NPC in this game. So what? Are you going to kill me? The brat tried to sound strong, but Shigaraki could feel the trembling in his shoulders. But hey, that was a nice idea. You're pretty smart for a brat. Shigaraki held the boy securely even as he began to jerk and pull. Oh, All Might watch this. And with that, Shigaraki placed his entire hand on the boy's back. There was a moment as nothing happened and then Shigaraki felt his uniform start to flake. Oh, how the brat cried out in fear before his skin started to decay. The look on All Might's face was priceless. Shigaraki wished he had brought a camera. _____. Izuku felt the moment Shigaraki's hands started to decay the skin on his back. It burned. It felt like the time he had tripped and scraped his knees across the carpet. The friction burns made it hard to walk for the next few days. But this was way worse than that. And Nana couldn't help him. Izuku had begged her to help him, but there was some interference. She couldn't just steal Shigaraki's energy like she did to Bakugo or the zero-pointer. Izuku hadn't had the time to ask for the specifics. But even so, he screamed out, pulling at whatever power he could. The lights all around started flickering. Some even breaking in a shower of sparks. Like before, Izuku experienced the feeling of his soul stepping out of his body. But, it was different this time. He could see he wasn't dead. His body was in pain, yes, but still very alive. And Nana was there. Her anger and sorrow seemed to snap him out of whatever pain-fueled trance he was in. Izuku. What dash? I don't know, Izuku said immediately. And he didn't. Whatever power this was wasn't something he was familiar with. But everything was moving so fast now. Not the real world. But the spirit one. Nana grabbed him quickly before pulling him away from Shigaraki's spirits. They reached out for him, but like before they couldn't reach. But unlike before, they could reach his body. Izuku could only watch as they were absorbed into his body. All of them. At once. His body's eyes started glowing a bright white color as his head bent back without his control. And even in the spirit world where things move slower, the wail that vibrated into the air was nothing short of haunting. Chapter 24. In his haste, or horror, Shigaraki released Izuku's body, taking a step backward away from it. It seemed that the spirits inside his body didn't care as they stepped forward towards where All Might was fighting the Nomua. Midoriya! Get away! He tried to warn but it was too late. The Nomu's attention was now locked. Izuku's spirit, well, he couldn't help but be fascinated by what was happening. It was horrifying of course, but nothing like he had ever seen before. He almost wished he had his notebook. His body, possessed by the spirits of the Chimeras, looked ready to go face to face with the Nomua. Feet planted on the concrete like a bull ready to charge. The Nomu seemed to take this as the challenge that it was as it planted its feet as well, barely glancing at All Might. Its roar was bone-chilling, but Izuku couldn't help but note his body's wail had sounded worse. There was a split moment as they both stared at each other before Izuku's body took a deep breath in, almost lifting itself to its tiptoes, before wailing once more. Immediately, however, the Nomu joined in. As if trying to drown out the noise. What are they doing? Nana asked herself. Izuku shrugged. Is this fighting? No. Spirits don't fight. They hardly interact at all with each other. This. I don't know what this is. It seemed everyone had stopped to watch the spectacle as even Shigaraki paused his carnage. There was a pause as Izuku's body panted and heaved, seemingly from lack of air. The Nomu took a hulking step forward then as it readied its next roar. But Izuku's body took it by surprise. It seemed to be pushing itself beyond its limits just to prove a point to the Nomu, being louder and more aggressive in its sound than before. And weirdly the Nomu didn't join back right away. Instead, it took a moment and watched Izuku's body scream. Face red and eyes streaming tears down his bloody face. Izuku's body didn't spot. Taking a step forward it screamed louder. Voice splitting into different pitches. The Nomu stepped backward and Izuku's body stepped forward again. There was another pause as Izuku's body heaved for breath and the Nomu tried to swipe at it only for an arc of energy to smack it away. The lights flickered hard, cutting out completely before slowly flickering back on. And the wailing began anew. Until Izuku's body backed the Nomu up to almost be in line with All Might. At that moment, Izuku's body fell to its knees. Shoulders shuddering and shaking. Voice a mangled wreck. Slowly, even slower in the speed of the spirit world, its eyes dimmed and closed and the body slumped over onto its side. There was silence on the battlefield as everyone tried to comprehend what happened. And all at once, things started back once more. All Might used the Nomu's confusion to slam it into the ground. Weirdly, it didn't seem to have much fight left as it slowly batted at All Might's blows. Meanwhile, Izuku watched his body as the mass of spirits leaked out of it like a puddle of light. The puddle beaded and rolled back over to Shigaraki as if magnetized, small moans sounded out in a mockery of the banshee screams before. And all at once, it reformed behind him. More subdued this time. Only holding onto Shigaraki directly lined up with the hands that littered his form. Izuku didn't wait. He ran back to his own body with Nana in tow. Both grabbing on in time to be absorbed into it in a flash of white light behind his eyes. Coming to consciousness, Izuku looked up just in time to see Shigaraki and the Void Villain muttering to each other. Minutes later, a portal opened up beside them. There was no time to stop them before they disappeared. And when they did, the Nomu fell limp where All Might was fighting it. Not dead, but unresponsive as it still breathed and even blinked up at the sky. Izuku went to stand but found his legs shaking too bad. He fell back down like a newborn foal. His arms shook as he held himself up and dizziness took over. Darkness started to pull at the corners of his vision. He started to lose time as he fell into warm and bony arms. Kid. Hey, stay awake, alright? Backup's here now. You need to stay. All Might's voice faded out and Izuku couldn't find it in him to care. All that mattered was that there were reinforcements. And Shigaraki was gone. Nomu was down. He could sleep. _____. A complete nightmare. How can we even start to dash? Hush now. He's waking up. Izuku groaned as he forced his eyes to crack open. Dim light filtered in, causing temporary blindness as they adjusted. When they finally did, however, Izuku saw the skinny face of All Might leaning over him. The man was grinning a fake smile that wilted the longer he tried. Look who's finally awake. You had us worried there, kid. He was thirsty. His mouth was so dry he couldn't even produce saliva, let alone speak. Luckily, All Might seemed to realize this as he pressed a button and the apparent hospital bed Izuku was laying on raised up so that he was in an almost sitting position. In the next moment, a small straw was placed at his mouth and he frantically tried to sip from it. However, it was one of those coffee-stirring straws and All Might seemed to be pinching it in a way that only allowed a small trickle of water at a time. Take it easy. We don't want you to choke. All Might advised gently. Izuku didn't really care at the moment. But pretty soon his thirst was quenched enough and the straw was pulled from his mouth. He was given a moment of reprieve before a clipboard was tapped on his head by Recovery Girl. Young man. I have had just about enough of you this year. And it's only your first semester. She scolded before she wrapped a cuff around his wrist to check his blood pressure. Honestly, you're very lucky they brought you back here in time. You were completely dehydrated and anemic. Your own body was consuming its muscle mass to keep you alive. I can't heal that with a kiss, I'll tell you that. Izuku spaced out as she fretted over him and went through the standard checkup. All he could think about was the previous times he was revived and nearly ravenous in hunger. That meant his quirk must have relied on the energy in his body to heal and bring him back. If he was as close to death as Recovery Girl was saying, there was no way his own quirk could have brought him back. Lucky for you, I've been pumping you full of nutrients non-stop. So at least you won't waste away until we can get some actual food into you. The entire time, All Might was just watching him, and Izuku just knew they were in for a long discussion. We have to tell him, Zuku, Nana whispered gently beside him. I already heard them talking. They already know something's up. They won't accept half-truths anymore. Just that idea was enough to fill Izuku's stomach with dread, and the heart rate monitor he was hooked up to was reflecting that. His heart rate was still slower than average, but there was a noticeable pickup to beat of it. Recovery Girl noted this as she marked it on her clipboard. I know you both have a lot to talk about. So I'll step out and allow you some privacy. Which was nice, but the silence that accompanied her departure was not. Midoriya, I feel that you've been keeping a lot of secrets since we met. All Might started, looking like he was trying very hard to stay calm. But we've gotten to a point where you are putting yourself in more and more danger. Still, I know it usually wouldn't be any of my business seeing as how I am not Aizawa. But I feel certain, allowances should be made since you will become my successor. Wow, that's the most professional thing I've ever heard him say. Nana snickered, trying to lighten the mood. Which only sort of worked. I can tell you everything. Izuku blurted out. I'll tell you everything from day one, and you have to believe me. Because it's all true. All Might ran a hand over his face at the realization that this was no suddenly much more than just a discussion of quirks. I've seen a lot of things, my boy. I can promise to keep an open mind. So Izuku began his tale. Explaining the hard day he had at school being quirkless, avoiding using names of course, and the events that led him to want to jump off the roof in the first place. He watched as All Might's fists became whiter and whiter as he clutched the fabric of the sheets on the bed. I don't remember hitting the ground. All I remember is just standing there. And I saw a woman there. She was kneeling over my body, and when I saw you, I panicked. I tried to grab my body the same time she did, and we suddenly, I don't know, both got sucked in together. But that's not the unbelievable part. Izuku's own hands began to shake despite the warmth he felt of Nana's hands on top of them. She knows you, All Might. And she's the one who told me about One for All. Izuku watched the gears turn in All Might's head before realization crashed down. It's the truth, All Might. I swear. I can prove it if you don't believe me. I can dash. All Might raised his hand and stopped Izuku mid-word. No need, you can speak to her. She told you about One for All. He paused. Looking away from Izuku for a moment. Continue the story. I need a moment to process this. And so Izuku did. Explaining how he started his training. How he met a new friend. How he became happy again. He also spoke about all the powers he had come to realize that he had. The energy pull and boost. The flying. Everything. I left that note on your desk, Izuku admits though. Nana, Izuku watched All Might flinch. She saw Shigaraki when he was stealing your schedule. She could tell he was her grandson. All Might wilted. She'd be so disappointed in me. Actually, Izuku interrupted. She's not. She's upset. But not at you. You couldn't have known. All Might looked up hesitantly. Is she here? Right now? Always. She's always with me. Always. Izuku says, leaning into the warmth beside him. When we bonded, her connection to One for All snapped. She goes wherever I go. Izuku notices a moment too late that it was probably not the best idea to mention he was so close with All Might's mentor. It seemed almost like gloating, and Izuku didn't want that. But still, there was no way they could speak unless he acted as a go-between. And that could be awkward. Looking up, Izuku saw All Might staring at him once more. "Why, is something wrong?" he asked nervously. All Might seemed to snap out of a trance of some kind and cleared his throat. "It's been a long time since I've seen my master. It's odd. She's so close, but yet unreachable." That was understandable at least. But Izuku suddenly had an idea. Thinking back on what happened at the USJ, there's no reason it couldn't happen again. He just had to step out. In a way that didn't involve dying. Harder than he thought it was, it turns out, as he closed his eyes and tried to ease his breathing. It was just like falling asleep, right? "Izuku, honey, what are you doing?" Nana asked, concerned. "I want you to take control of my body. So you can talk to All Might. Tell him you aren't disappointed," he explained. There was a hum from Nana and Izuku felt her warmth fade from his side right before his stomach seemed to drop and he was cast into limbo like before. Only this time, Nana seemed to slot right in place in his body without him. It was weird, but a lot less terrifying than it was at the USJ. Looking over, Izuku watched the heart monitor slow to an extreme level. His body was slumped just slightly before it righted itself once more. When his eyes opened, it was the same glowing white as before. "Toshinori." A voice, Nana's voice, came from Izuku's mouth. Izuku watched All Might's hands clench hard on the arms of his seat in surprise. Master. Midoriya. What is dash? I'm not quite sure, Toshi. Nana/Izuku spoke with a sluggish shrug. We experienced something like this at the USJ. With the Nomua. But this is new. There was silence and Izuku noticed a tugging in his stomach growing stronger and stronger, pulling him towards his body. It seemed Nana could feel it too as she spoke quicker. There really is a lot we need to discuss. But I don't have much time. This is draining for Izuku. But I believe Izuku will make a strong successor for One for All. Please don't change your mind. He can do great things. And he needs your help now more than ever to regain all his lost progress before the sports festival. Nana was speaking faster and Izuku felt the pull tighter. Nana, this isn't about me, dash. And don't beat yourself up so much, Toshinori. I'm still so proud of the hero you became and I want to watch you pass that knowledge into Izuku. She had a lot of things to say and not a lot of time to say it before Izuku was jerked back towards his body and shoved inside. There was a moment of discombobulation as Izuku fell back hard against the pillow. Before he knew it, the back of the bed was being lowered once more by All Might's shaking hands. All Might dash. I'll bring Recovery Girl back so she can set up more fluids. I'm sure your mother is almost here and I'd rather explain what I can so you can rest. All Might rushed as he collected his phone, walked to the front of the office. He paused, resting his hand on Izuku's covered knee, and gave a weak smile. We can talk about this later. Which was a terrifying thought, but Izuku assumed it was only fair. Chapter 25, Infirmary Stays Are Boring. I also have. Izuku woke up to a frantic muffled sound growing louder. He had been in and out of consciousness for a few hours at that point and it was the first time he heard such a noise. However, it was quickly becoming apparent that this was something serious. He stirred, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. It sounded like someone was screaming with a pillow on their face. And it only got worse. Quickly, he heard Recovery Girl run over, but she stayed on the opposite side of the curtain, leaving him unable to see what was going on. "You're safe, Eraserhead." She tried to soothe, but Eraserhead's, Aizawa's, panic was too loud, it seemed. Izuku began to hear the metal clinking of the bed shaking. "All right, try to stay still and I'll remove part of the bandages." There were a few more seconds before a choked gasp filled the air. "Midoriya," Aizawa shouted out with a cough. "Is just fine." "Midoriya." Aizawa continued to thrash. Izuku could hear it. "Sir." Izuku called out quietly. "I'm here. I'm okay." Aizawa stopped screaming, but his panting was deafening. Izuku had never heard the man so upset. "Mr. Aizawa, are you okay?" Izuku asked as the quiet persisted. Slowly, the curtain was pulled open and Izuku was able to get a full look at Mr. Aizawa. Well, as best as he could, with the man's entire body wrapped in bandages. Even on his face there were bandages. But Izuku could see that some had been pulled down under his chin to give him the freedom to talk. What could be seen of Aizawa's eyes were raking over Izuku, honing in on every little detail. "I want an explanation. Now," he said gruffly. "Recovery girl, sit me up." "I will do no such thing. You should be resting. Please." "And that must not have been something Mr. Aizawa said regularly as Recovery Girl grabbed his bed's remote and started to raise it just enough to set him up. "You look alive." "You as well, sir." Izuku was at loss for words. He didn't know what to say that could potentially ease any bit of the stress Aizawa must be feeling. This seemed to be apparent as Aizawa rested his head back onto the pillow and huffed. "Let's keep it that way, all right," he surmised, leaving no room for Izuku to protest. "Not like he would, of course." Underscore. Another hour or so passed before Izuku's mother rushed inside and straight over to his bed. There were tears in her eyes as she took in his sunken cheeks and pale skin. But before she could freak out and potentially wake Aizawa, who had thankfully fell back asleep, Izuku gave her an almost blinding smile. "I'm okay, Mom." He barely flinched as her warm hands grabbed him by the cheeks and started to move his face around as if expecting to find hidden scratches and wounds. "Really, I am. I just used too much energy with my quirk." This seemed to be the moment Recovery Girl stepped in. "He's mostly correct. It seems that his quirk absorbs the energy in his body, and when it runs out, it absorbs things like body fat and muscle mass. With this information, Yue can create a dietary plan that suits his body and quirk without causing this kind of reaction again." For a horrifying moment, Izuku's mother seemed to hesitate. As if rejecting Yue's help, or maybe even worse, thinking of pulling him out of Yue. "See, Mom. They can help me. It'll all be okay. If you're sure, honey." Inko relented and Izuku knew it had to do with wanting him to be happy. That's why he loved his mother so much. With that settled, Recovery Girl said once more. "I would like to keep Izuku here overnight. We've been giving his body constant nutrients to make up for what his quirk consumed, and it would only benefit him if we kept going." Again, his mother hesitated, but one look at Izuku's excited desperation caused her to give in. "All right, would he be expected to attend classes anytime soon?" "Oh no. Not at all. Class is cancelled for the next few days while UA strengthens its security in the wake of this attack. To make sure it doesn't happen again." Recovery Girl's professional optimism was working wonders on Izuku's mother's worries. Underscore. Izuku once again slept as he was given more and more nutrition. The next morning, he was allowed to finally step out of bed and shower. There was a bathroom attached to the office which contained everything he needed. Even a set of sweats and a t-shirt. When he came out he felt a lot better, which Nana seemed happy about. "Where were you yesterday?" "When my mom came in," he asked her as he paced around the small space for exercise. "Exploring. Eavesdropping." Wandering. Nana replied casually. Thinking mostly. Izuku quickly grew bored of the constant quiet mixed with the beeping of Aizawa's heart monitor. But he wasn't allowed to leave in case he tired himself out. Luckily, he was saved with the arrival of lunch. With lunch came the arrival of All Might and the waking of Aizawa, and Izuku was finally able to eat solid food. All Might walked into the office in his deflated form as Izuku was digging into his lunch. A heavy beef broth for the moment, but he was promised more if he could keep it down. "Good morning, Midoriya. You're looking better." "Feeling better," Izuku said happily. For a moment, All Might's eyes darted over to Aizawa, who was lazily sipping a jelly pouch with one free arm. But he quickly recovered. "I was hoping to have a chat with you in private, but that can wait until you're ready to go home. Tell him he can have the conversation here." Nana piped up. "He wants to talk about One for All." "Oh dash," Izuku said quickly. "Well, Nana says you can have the conversation here." Again, All Might looked to Aizawa, who only quirked an eyebrow at the pair. "Is she sure? Aizawa needs to know all the cards on the table." Izuku repeated her words, much to All Might's dismay. "He knows how Nana and I bonded together, as well as some of the powers that I've developed," he added. It was a very hard conversation to have, Izuku knew. But he agreed with Nana that Aizawa should be in the know as well. So many secrets are hard to keep when they're all scattered around. So, with All Might's consenting nod, Izuku talked. He started with the fact that Nana was All Might's mentor, and how she died while giving him a chance to escape a great enemy. He mentioned how she watched over him after that, sticking with him through decades of hero work. Izuku jumped past that day on the roof, seeing as how they both knew what happened. The only thing he didn't explain was, there's a secret about All Might's quirk, and exactly why Nana had to sacrifice herself. This, Aizawa seemed to understand finally. "Right, so what is this big secret?" With one final glance at All Might, Izuku turned to Aizawa and spoke, wringing his hands together. "All Might's quirk is called One for All. It's a stockpiling quirk passed down from user to user. Nana was the 7th. All Might is the 8th. One for All's original holder was someone thought to be quirkless. His brother had a quirk that was able to take anyone else's quirk. And he was a very, very bad man. Letting that hold in the air, All Might seemed to take up the podium. One for All's original owner passed on the quirk before he died. And its mission to stop his brother All for One from destroying the world. What followed was decades of fighting between All for One and the holders of One for All. It ended with me. Years ago. The reason I can only work for a few hours every day. But All for One's reign of terror ended. But Nana was bonded to All Might through One for All. It kept her soul and spirit pure. And when she bonded with me, her connection to One for All ended." There was a pause as Aizawa seemed to absorb all that information. It was agonizing. "So, you have no need for a successor?" Aizawa asks. All Might sighed heavily. "Midoriya, tell him what you saw at the USJ." Izuku felt his stomach drop. Nana, before she died, she had a son. For his protection, she put him in the system. But at the USJ I saw her son's spirit. And others. They were all surrounding Shigaraki, the leader of all those villains. She says that's her grandson. It was after you passed out, but Shigaraki grabbed me and I was forced out of my body by those spirits. They took control and had some kind of standoff with the Nomua. I think I heard. The air was thick with tension as Izuku finished his broth, even as it weighed heavy in his stomach. "You want Midoriya to be your successor. You want Midoriya to inherit a decades-old war that's quite literally gotten him killed within his first year of UA." Aizawa said with barely concealed rage. All Might went to speak, but Izuku just couldn't stay silent. "No. Mr. Aizawa, that isn't it. He asked me before and I said no. But I decided later that I wanted it. I still do. It's my choice. He's not forcing me into it or anything, I promise. All Might quickly followed. I fully intended to tell him everything before giving him my quirk. I wasn't going to just force it on him. And Nana told me everything before then. As far as informed decisions go, I'm as informed as I could ever possibly be. Izuku felt his heart beating rapidly as Nana's arms wrapped around him from behind. I would never let you make this choice if I felt you were unprepared. She swore. And I chose you as the successor even before Toshinori did. Aizawa's eyes softened just a bit as he sighed. Regardless of how informed you are, I can't help but think you're too young to make this choice. But I can't control you. And I won't stop you. The best I can do is make sure you're capable of defending yourself should you need to. It wasn't approval. But it was something. That being said. Oh, he spoke too soon. I want a report from both of you when classes are able to start again, Aizawa said with a bit of smug energy. All Might, I want to know exactly what kind of power Midoriya is going to have when he takes on your quirk. And Midoriya, I want to know everything you can tell me about the quirk you have now. Izuku rubbed the back of his neck nervously. That's the thing, sir. I've been stumped on how to analyze my own quirk. I just don't know where to start. Then I guess you better figure it out before classes start. Aizawa's voice wasn't harsh, but it was firm, leaving little room for protest. Even All Might was rendered speechless in the wake of it. But Izuku figured it was a fair enough request. Izuku's mother picked him up not long after. Well, a taxi called on Yue's dime drove them home. It was pretty generous and Izuku's mother had a hard time accepting before she was told it probably wasn't a good idea to try to ride the train after the news of the attack became public knowledge. When Izuku was finally able to go to his room, his stomach felt like it was going to burst with the amount of food his mother had given him. She seemed to have been stress cooking all day, anxiously awaiting his return. But Izuku was finally free to be alone. Immediately, he took out his personal quirk journal and opened it up to the next blank page. I seem to be able to disassociate from my own body on command now after the USJ attack. It seems to allow nearby spirits to use my body as their vessel for a short period of time. My quirk feeds on my body's energy. Not sure yet if it's the healing that takes all the energy or the act of coming back to life. If there is no energy stored up, my quirk uses my own muscles and fat to power itself. When that is consumed, safe to say there is no more coming back. Maximum times I've come back in the same day, 2, 3. Note, not sure if the possession by the chimeras count. As long as I have a steady power source nearby, I am free to use my enhanced abilities without using my own energy. But if I absorb too much energy, my body starts deteriorating. Possible uses: communication with spirits for information, closure for those who've lost someone, seeing how badly someone is injured. Don't forget stealth, sweetie. I can be pretty sneaky when I want to be, Nana teased and Izuku laughed but did write that down as well. He took the time to detail his own connection to Nana. How they communicated, but haven't tested that with distance. My body is a lot colder than normal. If my body were the appropriate temperature, I exhibit the signs of a very high fever. Reason to believe this is because of my quirk, seeing as how All Might never received the same treatment. In the end, Izuku had about a fourth of the notebook filled with his own notes and analysis. He left plenty of space for developments and notes on when he inherited One for All. But the hour was late. He had yawned 3 times in the last 5 minutes while writing and Nana encouraged him to go to bed. You can finish up tomorrow, sweetie. You've had a hard day. You need your rest, she urged as Izuku was already walking to his bed. He tucked himself under the blankets before he felt Nana's warmth stroking through his hair. Sleep well. Tomorrow's a new day and we have plenty to do. Rather than dwell on those words, Izuku chose to fall into an exhausted, but restful sleep free of nightmares. A little note here. I was informed about a month ago about a work on here that clearly plagiarized this fic. Even word for word with only a slight change in plot. I have since talked to the author of said work and thankfully they deleted it. Chapter 26, Careless Whispers. Class started again 4 days later. It was a quiet affair mostly. But that was expected seeing as how the news of what happened at the USJ spread like wildfire. UA didn't want to call attention to the return of the students. In fact, the only contact Izuku had with anyone from UA during those days was Shinsu. Shinsu was very upset about what happened. Even when he wasn't told all the details, Izuku figured seeing the bandaged mummy that was Aizawa was enough to seriously shake him. Izuku had apologized as much as he could without being too annoying about it, and Shinsu seemed to accept it, but things were still tense between the two of them. Not to mention the nightmares that Izuku seemed to develop now. He couldn't help it as he felt that he wasn't in control of his own body anymore. The night after he came home, Izuku awoke to see Nana leaning over his body. It startled him to the point where he screamed, nearly falling off the bed. Nana jumped back in surprise almost as soon as his eyes opened. Sitting up, Izuku turned on his bedside lamp with a shaking hand. However, when the light came on it seemed like there was no difference in the room. Just to make sure, he flicked it on and off again. The bulb lit up in its usual white light, but that light wasn't projecting around the room. "Izuku, honey, your eyes," Nana finally said, resting her hand on his shoulder. As Izuku looked over he could still see Nana plain as day. However, it wasn't like the times when he died. Instead, her colors were muted leaving only the bright yellow of her gloves standing out. Reaching up, Izuku scrubbed at his eyes. "Nana, what's happening?" he asked worriedly as nothing seemed to change. "They're glowing." "I don't know." Nana muttered and Izuku watched her get closer to his face even as he moved back. "Oh. You can see me." It was weird. Izuku watched her lips move, but her voice was still projecting into his head. "Yes, am I?" "You're still alive." "Good." But they were still left with an awkward situation of Izuku now able to see Nana but not able to perceive light at all. They managed to get through it, but turning it off was a lot harder than it was for Izuku to turn off his floating. It seemed like an ability that always wanted to stay on. And he now had to intentionally concentrate on suppressing it. "Maybe Aizawa can help," Nana suggested. "He has a quirk that affects his eyes." "Are we so sure this is my quirk?" Izuku asked to thin air now that his eyes stopped glowing. Remember what your principal said? Multiple powers for multiple catalytic events." Izuku kicked the blankets off his legs then, attempting to get up to fetch his notebook, but a rush of warmth on his shoulders stopped him. And almost embarrassingly, his eyes flicked again. This exposed the side of Nana's very unimpressed face as her hands rested on his shoulders. "Nope. Lay down. It's bedtime. You can write more in the morning. But for now, you need to sleep." And for a moment Izuku just looked at her. Truly the first time he was able to do so without having to die first. She was exactly how she looked in her photos. Hero suit and all. And maybe it was the late hour. Maybe it was his eyes trying to keep themselves from drying up. Maybe he was just emotionally overwhelmed by everything. But he felt tears welling up in his eyes. And her face softened. Not of sadness as it did any other time he was able to see her, but fondly. "Hey now," she cooed to him. And he cried. Cried harder than he had in a very long time. Almost hysterically as he leaned into her warmth. Not solid enough to support his weight, but warm enough to make him feel safe. He cried until his head hurt and Nana gently urged him to lay down again. She hovered on the bed as if laying beside him even though she had no mass. Izuku felt her hand petting his hair while she urged him to close his eyes and go to sleep. He didn't want to, of course. He wanted to see Nana's face and watch her smile for hours. But his exhaustion won out. He was asleep before he could stop himself. _____. The first day back, Shinsu and Izuku walked to UA together. They weren't able to do it often seeing as how Shinsu often accompanied his parents early in the morning. Izuku fought hard to keep his eyes from shifting the entire time. The last thing he wanted was to remind Shinsu of what happened at the USJ. So the pair made their way into the building, Shinsu splitting off to the staff lounge to let his other parent know they made it while Izuku made his way down to Recovery Girl's office. As he expected, Aizawa was there getting some painkillers before classes started. As soon as Izuku entered, Izuku reached into his bag and pulled out the journal he had been writing in the entire time. It was about 3/4 full of information about his quirk, including the newer developments. But Izuku still needed help. "Mr. Aizawa, I need advice," he said in place of a greeting. What about?" Aizawa asked as he swallowed the pills dry and accepted the journal. And Izuku finally allowed his eyes to shift. Immediately the room went mostly dark, leaving Nana the only visible figure in the room. She was standing by Aizawa looking him over, but as she saw his eyes glow she floated back over. Her arm settled around his shoulders. What surprised Izuku, however, was Aizawa. All around the man was a glowing light. Pale blue in color, but he was the epicenter. The light was almost orb-shaped with the top tapering and flickering like fire in a breeze. Izuku blinked harshly then. "Nana, can you see that?" "See what, sweetie?" "Mr. Aizawa, I think I'm looking at your soul." Izuku finally stuttered out. Because that's the only thing it could be. Nana had no orb around her. Rather, she was glowing. Aizawa was just barely an outline, but he was surrounded by this light. "My soul." Aizawa paused as he looked through the journal. Reaching for the desk nearby, he grabbed a pen and handed it and the journal to Izuku. "Draw it for me." Izuku's artistic skills were decent at least. And the orb wasn't complex at all. As he was doing so, Recovery Girl reappeared from a closet with a roll of bandages in her hand. As Izuku looked up at her, he could see she had one as well. However, it wasn't as neatly rounded as Aizawa's. Like it had wrinkles. And the tail at the top flickered at a much more even pace than Aizawa's. He drew hers as well before handing the journal back. "I need to know how to keep it off. It dries my eyes out like your quirk does, so I figured you could help me." Izuku trailed off with a question. It was almost anticlimactic as Aizawa shrugged and sighed. "Passive quirks like that have to be trained. You're way behind your peers when it comes to that. So all I can suggest is practice and eye drops. Lots of eye drops." Izuku expected the answer, but that didn't make it any more disappointing. But he figured that was because he was hoping for some kind of cure-all for it. Also, can I ask about those counseling sessions?" While he didn't wake up every night from nightmares, his sleep was far from peaceful. "They start next week. We've had to adjust to include everyone in your class to have their sessions as well to make sure there's no lasting trauma based on what happened. You'll receive your session time in the next few days," Aizawa promised, handing Izuku a small box of eye drops from the medicine cabinet. "A drop in each eye every few hours, problem child. Anything else?" Izuku shook his head, and with a promise from Aizawa that he would read the journal over his lunch break, Izuku left Recovery Girl's office. He wandered around a bit, even camped out near the front gate. He hoped to catch Itza or Eureka or Azui on their way in, but he didn't. Oddly enough, he didn't see anyone from 1A at all. Eventually, it got to the point where he would be late to class if he waited around any longer. So he rushed to the classroom. Everyone was already there. Everyone. The only open seat was his own. Which meant everyone had to have come much earlier than usual. That was odd. He didn't receive any email or anything about it. As he stepped in, he waved to his classmates. "Hey, everyone. What's going on dash? Class is now in session. Everyone take their seats and stop talking." Aizawa grumbled as he trudged his way inside. It was his usual opening, so Izuku didn't feel too singled out at the fact that he was the only one not already sitting. Aizawa made a statement about the USJ. How they were all very brave and handled the situation well for students in their first term. But also how UA wasn't going to let anything like that happen again. He even broke the news about the counseling sessions. Lastly, he said, straightening up. "I know that some of you may be worried about me since the USJ incident. I want to ease those worries. Yes, I still have injuries. But I am fully capable of doing my job. And in case any of you are feeling guilty for not jumping in to fight, don't." His voice was firm and he even reached up with the arm not in a sling to push his hair out of his face. "You are all children still. You have so much to learn before you are ready to enter the world as heroes. And it is my job as your teacher and a hero to make sure you all stay safe. Understand?" There was a chorus of "Yes, Sir" from the entire class, and Aizawa nodded. "All right then. Let's talk about the sports festival." The change in subject lifted everyone's spirits greatly. Izuku found his eye shifting several times during class. But he learned that focusing on his notes helped. Once, however, he found himself looking out over the sea of his fellow classmates. It may have been considered invasive to look at their souls, but he was so curious. They all had the same basic shape. Some more expressive than others. Kirishima's soul shifted and twisted constantly. Denki's was prone to releasing small fizzles of electricity. Todoroki's was oddly still. And Tokoyama's had its separate section attached to it. They all had their own differences that set them apart. He noted them all, sketching them in another notebook, seeing as how Aizawa had his. It was one of the most interesting classes they had had so far. _____. When class ended, Izuku stayed back long enough to give Aizawa the second notebooks with the soul sketches inside. Not only that, but Aizawa had held him back long enough to give him a lunch pass. It was almost like Izuku's student ID card, but specifically for the cafeteria. "What's this for, sir?" Izuku asked. "This is for your new diet plan. When you get your tray, scan this and you'll get your meal. It's probably the standard lunch items in bigger portions with a health shake." Aizawa explained. "Eat as much as you feel you can. Prioritize the health shake." Izuku thanked Aizawa before heading out, noting nobody in the hall at all. He hadn't talked to his friends all day and was looking forward to eating with them again after so long. So he almost practically ran to the cafeteria. It was filling up quickly, so he got into line as soon as possible. Aizawa was right about the food. It was quite a lot, but it looked very delicious. Lunch Rush even slipped a little menu on his tray to go along with it. Turning around, he surveyed the cafeteria, trying to get a look at where his friends could be. "Nana, help me out." "On it." Just his luck, he found them with only a little bit of searching. They were sitting at a table to the back. And Aitsa and Yurarika were leaning close to Azui. They looked to be muttering about something as Izuku started to walk over, tray in hand. Briefly, their eyes darted up to look at Izuku and he smiled at them. "Izuku, wait!" Nana tried to interrupt at the same time as Izuku watched all three of the people he would call his friend wince at the sight of him. His pace slowed considerably as he watched them. Azui had her head ducked down, hair covering her face. Yurarika looked like she was trying to comfort her, pulling her into a sort of side hug while quickly glancing between her and Izuku. They were talking about him. Lastly, Izuku looked to Aitsa. hoping with all hope that his assumptions weren't true. His eyes darted down to the empty seat beside Itza. Itza's eyes followed his gaze and Izuku watched him shake his head just the smallest amount. Oh. Izuku wasn't welcome with them anymore. I tried to stop you. Nana's voice was distant to Izuku's ears as he felt his chest tighten. He wasn't welcome. Who cares what they think, sweetie? Let's go. Izuku probably looked like an idiot, standing in the middle of the cafeteria with his tray in his hands. But he couldn't help it. He thought, Yue was supposed to be different than Aldera. And then both Itza and Eureka were looking at him with pitying looks. Like so many other students had done when Bakugo or his goons had thrown his backpack in the pond. Or put mud and worms in his shoes. Or just plain told him he was useless. His hands trembled dangerously while holding his tray. And he had half a mind to just drop it then and there. Run out and hide somewhere. Think about just how he could be so stupid as to believe he could fit in. Suddenly there was a hand on his shoulder and one on his back. His tray was taken out of his hand and he was being led away. Distantly, he registered Shoji and Tokoyami on either side of him. They led him out towards the courtyard where picnic tables sat. They too were pretty full, but there were a couple of backpacks on one, which was where they took him. You can sit here, Midoriya, Tokoyami said firmly, and Shoji hummed affirmatively. Izuku couldn't speak. He felt his heart sinking deeper with every breath. And with that, his eyes seemed to flicker as well. Despite their attempts at calming him down, Izuku just felt betrayal stab deeper. They just he tried to explain but couldn't. We know. They should be ashamed of themselves. I didn't hurt anybody. Izuku rambled. If they're upset about the USJ, I mean, I couldn't control that. We know. Chapter 27, Revelry. Izuku had to fight the tears in his eyes by pressing the heels of his hands into them. It hurt. The rejection. He had been so sure things would be different at UA, but now he could see he was wrong. I'm sorry. He tries to apologize as he raises his head up. But Shoji, placing his large hand in front of him, stopped him. Don't be. You did nothing wrong. It was one of the first times Izuku had ever heard him speak. So it gave him pause, momentarily distracting him from his tears. He's right. Tokoyami steals his attention, crossing his arms over his chest. We knew from the moment you didn't come in early for the class meeting that something was wrong. Izuku's lip quivered, but he managed not to sob. See class meeting. Shoji shifted beside him and Izuku watched as two of his arms dug through his backpack. One pulled out a cell phone while the other pulled out a small package of tissues. Setting the latter in front of Izuku, Shoji unlocked his phone and handed it over as well. Izuku made sure to grab a tissue first, mopping the tears off his cheeks before he grabbed the phone. From Yaoyorozu. I'm gathering a class meeting. It's scheduled for the first day back. Arrive an hour earlier than usual. Mineta and Azui said they have some information the class should know. It's about the USJ attack. From Yaoyorozu. Do you think you'll be able to make it? From Shoji. Yes. From Shoji. What's this about? From Yaoyorozu. To be honest, I'm not sure. But they seemed very shaken, so I want to hear them out. From Shoji. I'll be there. I'll also let Tokoyami know as well so you don't have to contact him. From Yaoyorozu. Thank you. That makes my job easier. See you then, Shoji. Izuku's hands shook as he passed the phone back to Shoji. I had no idea, I was wondering why nobody was around. Both Shoji and Tokoyami let out heavy sighs. We didn't know you were excluded from the meeting until it started and you were the only one not there, Tokoyami informed. Which made sense given that the meeting was about you. Me. Izuku couldn't believe it. Itza, Eureka, and Azui knowing about his quirk was one thing. But the whole class? Actually it was mostly just Mineta talking, Tokoyami noted. Basically, Mineta called you some kind of possessed zombie creature of darkness and told us what they saw before they carried Mr. Izawa out of there. Azui didn't deny any of it, Shoji added, and Izuku felt crushed. Really, how else was he supposed to feel? The entire class knew about his quirk. From how Tokoyami described it, they even knew all the gory details. Holding his head in his hands, Izuku took a shuddering breath. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for any of this to happen or for it to make it seem like I was lying to all of you. It's just so hard to explain. I know. Tokoyami interrupted, leaning just a bit closer. I've known from day one that you have a spiritual attachment. Dark Shadow and I could feel it in the entrance exam. Izuku corrected on instinct before he froze, his brain finally catching up. You knew. And Izuku watched as Tokoyami looked, almost excited. Yes. I knew. I could feel it. But I never knew how to bring it up or if you even knew about it. But when I heard about what happened at the USJ, I knew. Tokoyami had steadily moved closer and closer until Shoji finally had to reach over and rest a hand on his shoulder. You're overwhelming him, he said, which caused Tokoyami to back up quickly. I apologize for my eagerness. I just never met someone with a quirk so similar to mine, he said, bowing his head. Izuku couldn't help but stumble over his words. It's not really all that similar? I guess you and I would have the closest similarities in quirks than anyone else in the class. But Dark Shadow seems to a different sort of entity. He cut off his ramblings with a nervous chuckle. Oh. Tokoyami seemed intrigued. And that was when Dark Shadow emerged in the bit of shade over their table. Situating themselves between Tokoyami and Izuku. Rubbing the back of his neck, Izuku nodded. It has to do with my quirk. Proving his point, Izuku's eyes flickered. Oddly, Dark Shadow was outlined in the light which followed along with their visible connection until it faded into Tokoyami. I'm not sure how to describe. It's a wisp, Nana suddenly adds. It's like a half-formed soul. Usually, they fizzle out after a while, but it seems like this one's found itself a host. Hello, there. Izuku looked over to see Dark Shadow facing Nana. Inching closer and closer until Nana could reach over and rest her gloved hand on its head. Izuku hesitantly relayed the information to Tokoyami, not quite looking away yet. It's different from my bond. She's a fully formed soul. She was a whole person. His voice was soft as he watched Nana interact with Dark Shadow. Come to think of it, she had never been able to do that with anyone but Izuku. Or at least, she never attempted to. What was her name? Tokoyami asked, shaking Izuku's attention away from the pair of spirits. Tokoyama's voice was calm and somber as if talking about a long-deceased relative. Shimura Nana. It brought Izuku's attention back to the subject at hand. And oddly he felt more grounded than before. He was still deeply hurt by his friend's actions. But Tokoyami and Shoji were helping him feel stable. You should eat, Shoji spoke as he placed Izuku's tray back down in front of him. They'll mark your record if you don't eat. You know about that? Izuku asked as he finally reached and grabbed his food. The little menu said it was seasoned chicken with udon noodles paired with veggie udon broth. On the side was a small corn salad beside what Izuku assumed to be the health shake. Shoji nodded and motioned to his mask. My mutation doesn't stop at my extra appendages. People tend to stare whenever I remove my mask. I skipped lunch for the first week of class until I was brought into Recovery Girl's office. At the reminder of their meal, Tokoyami started eating from his own tray. Shoji eats a supplement meal in Recovery Girl's office. He joins me here when he's finished. Izuku was surprised by all this new information about his fellow classmates. My quirk consumes my own energy, and when I run out it uses my own muscle and fat. After the USJ I was pretty malnourished. Recovery girl put me on a special diet too. He said, motioning to the food on his tray. You don't have to tell us what happened if you don't want to, Shoji noted. And you don't have to explain your quirk either, Tokoyami added. That surprised Izuku. Really? We all have our boundaries, Shoji tapped his mask once more. Oh. I like these kids, Nana said cheerfully as she hugged Izuku from behind. I think they'll be great for you. At the end of the day, we've all experienced quirk discrimination, Izuku listened to Tokoyami intently. The best thing we can do is stick together. I thought Azui understood that. Well, Izuku didn't see that as fair exactly. My quirk isn't a physical mutation, so I wouldn't expect her to understand. I think you all with physical quirks have it way harder than I do. No offense. None taken. But Izuku was pleased to see that it at least looked like Tokoyami was taking it in consideration. It was then that Izuku saw Shinsu stomping into the courtyard area. He looked around almost frantically before his eyes landed on Izuku. As soon as he did, he all but ran over. Izuku noticed as he barely glanced at Shoji and Tokoyami as he wrapped Izuku in a hug. What happened? He demanded. Automatically, Izuku leaned into his hug. They know. They all know. His voice shook as he said it. Shinsu's arms tightened around him. And Izuku could almost feel him getting ready to pull Izuku away from the table as if one of the other two were ready to attack at a moment's notice. No, Shinsu, they're okay, great even, Izuku assured, pulling away just long enough to look up at the taller boy. Nana approves. It was very obvious that Izuku was pulling out all the stops to try to get Shinsu, who was very slow to trust others, to approve of Izuku's new friends. And Izuku could see it in his eyes how hard he was trying to accept that. I went looking to find you with the others. But you weren't there. I asked about you. They didn't answer. I used my quirk dash. Izuku's eyes widened at that. Shinsu was very careful about his quirk usage. Especially at UA. His quirk was one that was easily misunderstood. I just wanted to know where you were. And they pointed out this way. Shinsu looked over to Shoji and Tokoyami finally. Izuku pulled away to look as well. The pair were calmly waiting for them to have their moment. Not looking the least bit offended by the suspicion. Seeing the attention was on them, Tokoyami spoke. Clearly we all have explaining to do. And lunch won't last forever. He said, moving to the other side of the table, allowing Shinsu his spot beside Izuku. There was no debate as he took said spot, shivering slightly as Nana brushed against him in greeting. By the time they all finished their own descriptions of the day, lunch was over. They didn't separate as they all walked to classroom 1A. And much to Izuku's confusion, Shinsu walked him inside the classroom all the way to his seat. Izuku had yet to enter and Shinsu seemed to take the opportunity to glare the entire class down. Shoji and Tokoyami joined his efforts, leaving the class wide-eyed and speechless. Meet me by the gates and I'll walk you home, all right? Shinsu told Izuku, being loud enough for what Izuku assumed, Itza, Azui, and Yurarika to hear. Okay, Izuku forced a smile on his face, trying to not seem affected by their criticism. With that, Shinsu headed out. However, he made sure to fist bump one of Shoji's tentacle hands on the way out the door. Izuku was actually surprised this time when he walked into class to see that everyone was completely silent. He even paused in the doorway long enough to count all of his students before he walked up to the podium. Deeming everything somewhat all right, he began his lecture as normal.